Hello everyone, I am the Midnight Storyteller. I know you clicked on this video to relax for a while or perhaps to let my voice help you fall asleep. Before you do, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you now? And what time is it? Alright, find a comfortable position and relax. I've always had a thing for numbers, not in a Rain Man sort of way. I can't tell you how many toothpicks just fell on the floor or calculate square roots in my head. My relationship with numbers is more professional. As a data analyst for a mid-sized insurance company, I spend my days looking for patterns, anomalies, statistical significance. Numbers talk to me, but they've always been polite about it. Until 3 weeks ago, when one particular sequence started screaming. It began on a Tuesday morning. Nothing special about that day, same routine as always. Alarm at 6:30, shower, coffee, news, podcast while getting dressed. I was running late, so I grabbed my phone to check the time, 7:43. Except, for a split second before the screen lit up, I could have sworn it displayed something else, 3:14:21:16. Just a flash, gone before I could be certain. I dismissed it as morning brain fog and headed to work. The subway was crowded as usual, people packed like data points on a scatter plot, with no discernible pattern. I stood holding the overhead rail, watching the station numbers tick by, when the digital display above the doors flickered. Instead of next station, 42nd Street, it momentarily showed those same digits. 3:14:21 Turilla showed those same digits. 3:14:21. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the subway's aggressive air conditioning. Twice could still be coincidence. I told myself, the human brain is hardwired to find patterns, even when they don't exist. It's called pareidolia, the same phenomenon that makes people see faces in electrical outlets, or the Virgin Mary in a piece of toast. But by the end of the day, I'd seen that sequence 4 more times, on my computer monitor when it woke from sleep mode. On the digital clock in the conference room right before a meeting, on the microwave display in the break room, and on the receipt from the deli where I bought lunch. Each appearance lasted only a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to register it before it vanished. That night, I did what any self-respecting data analyst would do. I started a spreadsheet. I recorded each occurrence, time, location, device. If there was a pattern here, I would find it. The logical part of my brain suggested a medical explanation, perhaps the beginning of ocular migraines, or some other neurological issue causing me to see things. But another part, a part I wasn't entirely comfortable acknowledging, whispered that something else was happening. The next day brought 7 more sightings of 3:14:22:16. The day after that, 12, the numbers were appearing more frequently, and I began to notice something else. They seemed to be getting bolder, staying visible a little longer each time. On Friday morning, I watched as the numbers lingered on my bathroom mirror for a full 3 seconds, after the steam from my shower cleared. By the weekend, I was seeing the sequence everywhere: digital clocks, phone screens, ATMs, even the channel display on my TV. I began avoiding electronic devices when possible, but in today's world, that's like trying to avoid oxygen. The numbers followed me relentlessly, a digital stalker I couldn't block or report. On Sunday evening, I was about to pour myself a much-needed drink when a breaking news alert flashed on my phone. A man had died in my apartment building, apparent heart failure. The reporter mentioned the victim's name, Edward Kleinman, a retired accountant, who lived on the 4th floor. I'd passed him in the hallway occasionally, exchanged the obligatory neighborly nods. The news wouldn't normally have affected me much, except for one detail that made my blood freeze. Time of death estimated at 10:16 p.m., March 14th. March 14th, 22:16 military time. The glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the kitchen tile. I didn't move to clean it up, couldn't move at all. The numbers weren't random. They weren't a glitch or a hallucination. They were a date and time. Mr. Kleinman's death, predicted a week in advance. I spent that night pacing my apartment, thoughts racing faster than I could process them. Was this some bizarre coincidence? Had I somehow intuited the coming death of a neighbor? I barely knew. Or was something far more inexplicable happening? Monday morning arrived with no answers, but with a new sequence of. The pattern was identical, appearing briefly on digital displays, coming more frequently as the day progressed. I didn't need to be a data analyst to recognize the format now: month, day, hour, minute. March 21st, 23:58. Someone was going to die on March 21st, just before midnight. But who? I called in sick to work and spent the day researching similar phenomena. I found scattered accounts online, people claiming to have predicted deaths through dreams, visions, or other unexplained experiences. Most seemed like the ramblings of attention seekers or the mentally ill. But a few had the ring of authenticity that comes from genuine terror. One account in particular caught my attention. A woman in Portland who described seeing specific times and dates on clocks before accidents occurred. Her story ended abruptly. Her final post mentioned seeing her own birth date appearing repeatedly. She never posted again, and other users reported being unable to contact her. As March 21st approached, I became increasingly agitated. I considered warning people, but who? And what would I say? Excuse me, I've been seeing numbers that I think predict death. Are you free on the 21st? No. Great, carry on then. I'd sound deranged. Instead, I watched and waited, the new sequence now appearing dozens of times daily. On the morning of the 21st, I received a text from a coworker. Hey, heard you've been out sick. Hope you're coming to Sarah's goodbye. Happy hour tonight. Starts at 7 at O'Malley's. Sarah was our department head, leaving for a position at another company. I hadn't planned on attending her farewell gathering. Large groups and small talk weren't really my scene, but something compelled me to go. Perhaps being surrounded by people would keep the numbers at bay, at least for a few hours. O'Malley's was packed when I arrived. Sarah spotted me from across the room and waved me over, seeming genuinely pleased I'd made it. I ordered a beer and tried to act normal, to engage in conversation without constantly checking my phone or the bar's digital clock. For a while it almost worked. Around 11:30, people began to leave. Sarah hugged everyone goodbye, including me, her eyes slightly glassy from champagne. Don't be a stranger, she said, squeezing my arm. Just because I won't see you at the office doesn't mean we can't keep in touch. I nodded, managed a smile, watched as she collected her coat and purse. Something felt wrong, a pressure in my chest, a ringing in my ears. The sequence flashed in my mind. 32:12 Fred, March 21st, 2:58. 2 minutes to midnight. Sarah was stepping out the door when I lunged after her, nearly knocking over a table in my haste. Wait, I called, I'll walk you to the subway. She looked surprised but pleased. Such a gentleman, she teased, linking her arm through mine as we stepped onto the sidewalk. The March night was cold, the kind of damp chill that seeps into your bones. Actually, I said, my heart pounding, let me get you a cab instead. Before she could protest, I was already flagging one down, practically shoving her into the back seat. Text me when you get home, I insisted, handing the driver enough cash to cover the fare and a generous tip. As the taxi pulled away, I checked my phone. 11:57 p.m. 1 minute to the time I'd been seeing for days. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching the cab's taillights disappear around a corner. Had I just saved Sarah's life? Or was I losing my mind? The answer came the next morning. A text from another coworker. Did you hear about Mark? He was mugged last night, leaving O'Malley's. They stabbed him. He's gone. Mark. R.I.T. guy, quiet, kept to himself. I hadn't even noticed him at the happy hour. According to the news report I frantically pulled up, he'd been attacked at approximately 11:58 p.m., just outside the bar, minutes after I'd left with Sarah. The sequence had been right again, and I'd saved the wrong person. I took more sick days, barely eating or sleeping. The guilt was overwhelming. Could I have saved Mark if I'd known? But how could I have known? The numbers didn't come with names attached. And now a new sequence had begun appearing. 3:28 Funny 14. March 28th, 2014. 6 days away. Another death coming. I became obsessed with identifying the next victim. I made lists of everyone I knew, everyone I'd ever met, trying to find connections between Mr. Kleinman and Mark. They'd lived in the same city, yes, but millions of people did. One was retired, one was young, different backgrounds, different lifestyles. The only common factor was me. I had known both of them, however peripherally. Was that it? Were the numbers showing me deaths that would affect me personally? If so, the pool of potential victims was vast: family, friends, co-workers, neighbors, the barista who knew my coffee order, the dry cleaner who always asked about my day. How could I protect them all? As March 28th drew closer, I began seeing the sequence everywhere, constantly. It appeared on strangers' phones as I passed them on the street. It flashed on every screen I looked at. It even appeared in my dreams, glowing digits floating in darkness, sometimes accompanied by shadowy figures I couldn't quite make out. On the morning of the 28th, I woke with a terrible certainty. I needed to see this through. No more hiding. I would face whatever was coming. I spent the day in hyper-vigilant mode, watching everyone around me for signs of impending danger. I called my parents, my sister, my closest friends, ostensibly just to check in, but really to make sure they were safe, to warn them vaguely to be careful today. As evening approached, my anxiety reached unbearable levels. The sequence now appeared almost continuously, digital displays changing to show 3/220 of 2014. Whenever I looked at them, at 7:30 p.m., I made a decision. I would isolate myself, minimize the risk to others. I locked my apartment door, closed all the windows, disconnected the internet router, and turned off my phone. The only electronic device I left on was my wristwatch, an old-fashioned digital one. With a simple display, I needed to know when 8:14 p.m. arrived. When it passed, I sat in the center of my living room, lights off, watching the minutes tick by on my watch. 8:10, 8:11, 8:12, 8:13. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. The silence in the apartment was absolute. Nothing happened. 8:15. I exhaled shakily. Had I broken the pattern somehow? Had I every electronic device in my apartment turned on simultaneously? My phone, my laptop, the TV, even the microwave and the digital thermostat all displaying the same sequence, but not 3/28/2014. Inu 1, 4 war 4/20/3/2. And as the screens glowed in the darkness, I saw something else, reflections of movement where there should be none. Shapes shifting in the black glass of the TV, in the shiny surface of my phone, humanoid but wrong, somehow too tall, too thin, limbs at impossible angles. I scrambled backward, knocking over a lamp. In the brief flash before the bulb broke, I saw them clearly, dark figures standing in every corner of my room, their features indistinct, except for their eyes, glowing with the same blue-white light as digital displays. One of them moved toward me, its movement jerky like stop-motion animation. When it spoke, its voice was like static, like the sound of 1,000 keyboards being typed on at once. "We've been trying to reach you," it said, its words somehow understandable despite the distortion. "The numbers are a courtesy." What are you?" I managed to ask, pressing myself against the wall. "We exist in the spaces between your technology," it said. "We see the patterns of life and death. We've always been here, but your species has only recently built doorways for us. The death, Mr. Kleinman, Mark, you caused them." The figure tilted its head at an angle no human neck could achieve. "We do not cause. We observe. We notify." "Why me?" My voice was barely a whisper now. "Your pattern recognition, your attention to detail. You were most likely to notice." It moved closer. "Most humans ignore our warnings. They see the numbers but don't understand. Warnings. You're trying to warn people. Some deaths can be prevented. Some cannot. The choice to intervene is yours." I thought of Sarah, how I'd saved her without even realizing what I was doing. "So I can stop these deaths. All of them." The figure was silent for a moment. "There is always a balance. A life saved means another must end. The number remains constant." The implications hit me like a physical blow. By saving Sarah had I inadvertently doomed Mark? And if I tried to prevent the next death April 4th, 10:32 p.m., would I simply be redirecting fate towards someone else? What happens if I ignore the numbers? I asked. If I do nothing, the figure's form seemed to flicker like a bad connection. Then the pattern continues as it would have. But now that you've seen us, you'll always see the numbers, always know what's coming. And if I can't handle that knowledge, if it's too much, something like understanding seemed to pass across the figure's featureless face. There is one alternative. You could join us. See all patterns, all possibilities. No more uncertainty. I felt a cold weight in my stomach. Become like you. How? Your consciousness transferred to the network. Your physical form would cease, die. It was talking about dying. And if I refuse both options, if I don't want to see the numbers or join you, the figure moved back slightly. Then we will find another observer, but you will still see the numbers, only without understanding. Many humans do. They call it coincidence, déjà vu, intuition. They feel the pattern but cannot read it. I closed my eyes, trying to think. When I opened them again, the figures were gone, but my watch displayed a new sequence, 3/220 at 2:16. March 28th, 20:16. 2 minutes from now, my own death date. I had a choice to make, and only moments to make it. Continue as their reluctant prophet, carrying the burden of foreknowledge, but perhaps occasionally saving a life at the cost of another. Join them, becoming something no longer human but free from the limitations of mortality, or reject both options and live in perpetual uncomprehending fear of numbers that would haunt me forever. I looked at my watch again, 8:15. 1 minute left. In that moment I understood something fundamental about numbers, about patterns. They don't control reality, they describe it. They're the language the universe uses to talk to itself. And sometimes if you listen very carefully you can hear what it's saying. I made my decision. The watch display changed, 8, and everything went dark. Story 2. I've always been a light sleeper. Even as a child, the slightest noise would jolt me awake. A car passing by outside, the house settling, or the refrigerator humming to life. My parents took me to doctors who prescribed various remedies, but nothing seemed to work. I simply accepted that deep, restful sleep wasn't meant for me. That changed 3 months ago when my doctor prescribed a new medication. It's still in the final stages of approval, Dr. Winters explained, sliding the prescription across her desk. But the clinical trials have been promising. Very promising. She tapped the paper with her pen. Just 1 pill before bed. You should notice results immediately. I filled the prescription that same day. The pharmacist raised his eyebrows when he saw the medication name. Somnexia, but handed over the small white bottle without comment. That night, I swallowed the tiny blue pill and waited. Within 20 minutes, a pleasant heaviness settled over my body. My eyelids drooped, and for the first time in my life, I felt myself sliding effortlessly into sleep. And I dreamed. Not the fragmented, hazy dreams I occasionally experience during my fitful rest. This was different, vivid, hyper-realistic. I wasn't myself in the dream. I was someone else entirely, a middle-aged man named Robert Keller. I knew his name with absolute certainty, just as I knew he worked as an accountant at a small firm in Chicago. I lived his mundane evening routine, making dinner pasta with a jar sauce, watching television, a crime drama I'd never seen, and checking on his elderly mother who lived with him. She had dementia, and called him by his father's name. When I woke the next morning, the dream remained crystal clear in my mind. Unlike normal dreams that fade within minutes of waking, I could recall specific details: the family photos on Robert's mantle, the pattern of his mother's nightgown, even the brand of pasta sauce he used. It was disconcerting, but I attributed it to the medication. A powerful sleep aid must produce powerful dreams. I reasoned. The next night was similar. 1 pill, quick descent into sleep, and another vivid dream. This time, I was a young woman named Sarah Chen, a graduate student living in Boston. I attended her evening study group, made notes for her thesis on climate change economics, and called her boyfriend to say goodnight. Again, the details were remarkably specific: the titles of books on her shelf, the pattern of her bedspread, the exact words of her conversation. By the fifth night, I'd begun to find these dreams fascinating, rather than disturbing. I'd always lived a relatively solitary life, working from home as a software developer with few close friends. These dreams gave me a window into other lives, other experiences. I started keeping a dream journal, recording every detail I could remember upon waking. On the seventh night, I dreamed I was a man named Michael Dawson, a high school teacher in his 40s. The dream followed his usual evening, grading papers, making lunch for the next day, watching sports highlights. Around 11:30 p.m. in the dream, Michael went to bed. I felt his fatigue, the relief as he settled under the covers. Then came a tightness in his chest, mild at first, then increasingly painful. Michael sat up, gasping for air. He reached for his phone but knocked it to the floor. The pain intensified. He tried to call out but couldn't form words. Darkness crept in from the edges of his vision, and then, nothing. I woke with a start, my heart pounding, sweat soaking my sheets. The dream had been so real, the pain so vivid. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened to Michael Dawson, whoever he was. To calm myself, I made coffee and opened my laptop, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Out of curiosity, I typed Michael Dawson teacher into the search engine. Several results appeared, so I added high school to narrow it down. And there he was, Michael Dawson, 43, high school English teacher in Burlington, Vermont. The article was an obituary. He had died 3 days ago from a heart attack in his sleep. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold beside me. The photo showed the same face I'd seen in the bathroom mirror in my dream. The same slightly crooked smile, the same gray-flecked beard. According to the obituary, he was found when he didn't show up for work the next morning. Time of death was estimated to be around 11:45 p.m. The exact time I jolted awake from my dream. This couldn't be a coincidence. Somehow I had experienced Michael Dawson's final moments. But how? And why? I thought back to the other dreams. The other lives I'd stepped into. Were Robert Keller and Sarah Chen real people too? Were they still alive? I searched for them next. Robert Keller was harder to find. There were several accountants by that name in Chicago. But then I found an obituary dated just 5 days ago. Robert Keller, 58, had passed away unexpectedly in his sleep. The article mentioned he was survived by his mother, who suffered from dementia. My hands trembled as I searched for Sarah Chen. Please be alive, I thought. Please. But there it was, a notice from Boston University expressing condolences for the sudden passing of graduate student Sarah Chen, 26, who had died in her sleep 3 days ago. The cause was still being determined. I slammed my laptop shut and rushed to the bathroom, barely making it before I vomited. This couldn't be happening. It was impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. Somehow, this medication was connecting me to people on the verge of death. I was experiencing their final hours, witnessing their last moments of life. I flushed the remaining pills down the toilet that morning and called Dr. Winter's office. Her receptionist said she was booked solid for 2 weeks, but I insisted it was an emergency. They gave me an appointment for the following day. That night, I was afraid to sleep. I stayed up watching mindless television, drinking coffee, doing anything to keep myself awake. But eventually exhaustion won out. Without the medication, I expected to return to my usual fitful sleep. Instead, I found myself in another vivid dream. I was a woman in her 30s, Lisa Harmon, a nurse finishing her night shift at a hospital in Phoenix. I followed her as she drove home, fed her cat, and took a shower. When she finally went to bed around 8 a.m., I felt a familiar sense of dread. Sure enough, as she drifted off to sleep, her breathing became labored. She never woke up. The next morning, I frantically searched for news about a nurse named Eliza Harmon in Phoenix. Nothing yet. Perhaps there was still time. I called every hospital in Phoenix, asking for her. On my fourth try, I reached someone who knew her. Eliza, she's not in today. Called out sick, which isn't like her. Is this an emergency? Yes, I said. Please, you need to send someone to check on her. I think she might be in danger. Who is this? The voice became suspicious. I hung up, unsure what else to do. I couldn't exactly explain that I'd witnessed her death in a dream. Hours later, I found a brief news item online. A nurse had been found dead in her apartment, after colleagues became concerned when she didn't answer her phone. The name wasn't released pending notification of family. When I finally sat across from Dr. Winters the next day, I was a wreck. Dark circles underlined my bloodshot eyes, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I told her everything: the dreams, the deaths, the terrifying connection. She listened without interrupting, her expression carefully neutral. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. Mr. Harrison, what you're describing is simply not possible. Somnexia is a sleep aid. Nothing more. It can't connect you psychically to dying strangers. Then, how do you explain what's happening? I demanded. 4 people, 4 deaths, exactly as I dreamed them. The human mind is remarkably good at creating false connections, especially when under stress. You may have seen these obituaries before your dreams and incorporated them subconsciously. That's ridiculous, I said. I'd never heard of these people before. Dr. Winters adjusted her glasses. There are other explanations. Perhaps you're experiencing a form of parasomnia. Or maybe the medication is causing hallucinations that you're misinterpreting as precognitive dreams. So you think I'm either lying or crazy, I said flatly. I think you believe what you're experiencing is real, she replied carefully. But I'm concerned about your mental state. Sleep deprivation can cause paranoia and delusions. I'd like to refer you to a colleague, a psychiatrist, who specializes in sleep disorders. I left her office with another prescription, this one for an antipsychotic, and a referral I had no intention of using. Dr. Winters clearly thought I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I was, but that didn't explain how I knew intimate details about strangers who had died exactly as I'd dreamed. That night, despite my fear, exhaustion claimed me again. This time I was an elderly man named Gerald Fisher, living in a retirement community in Florida. I experienced his evening routine: dinner in the community dining room, a game of chess with a friend, a call with his daughter. When he went to bed, I braced myself for the inevitable. Sure enough, around 2 a.m., Gerald stopped breathing, just stopped peacefully, in his sleep. The next morning, I didn't bother searching for Gerald's obituary. I knew I'd find it eventually. Instead, I began researching Somnexia more thoroughly. The medication was developed by Nurix Pharmaceuticals, a company I'd never heard of before. Their website described Somnexia as a revolutionary sleep aid that works by synchronizing brainwave patterns to induce and maintain deep sleep states. I dug deeper, searching medical journals and clinical trial reports. Most of the information was hidden behind paywalls or written in technical language I couldn't fully understand. But I did find one article that caught my attention. A small study had been halted early due to unexpected neurological side effects in a subset of participants. I needed to speak with someone who knew more about this medication. Using professional networking sites, I identified several researchers who had worked on the Somnexia trials. Most ignored my messages, but one, Dr. Eleanor Patel, who had left Nurix 2 years ago, agreed to speak with me. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Dr. Patel was younger than I expected, maybe in her early 40s, with dark-rimmed glasses and a cautious demeanor. I can't tell you much, she said, after I'd explained my situation. I signed extensive non-disclosure agreements. People are dying, I said, and somehow I'm witnessing it. Please, anything you know could help. She stirred her coffee for a long moment, then spoke quietly. Somnexia wasn't originally developed as a sleep aid. It was part of a classified research program studying consciousness and its potential, transferability, and transferability. White repeated. What does that mean? The theory was that consciousness isn't entirely contained within our physical brains, that it exists partly in what some researchers call the consciousness field, a theoretical plane where minds can potentially connect. I leaned forward, like telepathy. Not exactly, more like temporary consciousness sharing. The initial goal was to develop a method for medical professionals to experience what patients with communication difficulties were feeling, pain levels, symptoms, that sort of thing. And somnexia does this. Dr. Patel glanced around before continuing. In most people, it simply works as a sleep aid. But in about 2% of users, it seems to create a state where their consciousness can wander, connect with others who are in vulnerable states, like people who are about to die. I said. She nodded reluctantly. That was an unexpected finding in the trials. A few participants reported dreams similar to yours. The company buried those reports and recategorized the drug as a simple sleep aid to fast-track approval. Why would dying people be more accessible? The theory is that as consciousness prepares to leave the body, it becomes more permeable, more open to connection. Those taking somnexia who have the right neurological profile can inadvertently link to these transitioning minds. I thought about the dreams, how real they felt, how helpless I was to change anything. So, I'm hitchhiking in dying people's minds. That's one way to put it, she said. But there's something else you should know. The longer this continues, the more your own consciousness becomes untethered. Some trial participants reported difficulty returning fully to their own minds after repeated episodes. What happened to them? Dr. Patel looked down at her coffee. Most recovered after discontinuing the medication, but 2 didn't. They fell into persistent vegetative states. Their bodies were alive, but their consciousness never fully returned. The chill ran through me, and the company is still pushing this drug. The risk is statistically small, and they've adjusted the dosage to minimize it. But yes, profit often outweighs caution in pharmaceuticals. She checked her watch. I need to go. I've already said too much. As she stood to leave, I grabbed her wrist. With how do I make it stop? I've already stopped taking the pills, but the dreams continue. She hesitated. The effect should diminish over time, but there's a theory that once these pathways are opened, they don't close easily. You might need to create barriers. Some participants found that certain mental exercises helped visualizing protective shields around their minds before sleep, focusing intensely on their own identity. Others used physical anchors, objects from their waking life held during sleep, to maintain connection to their bodies. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, I placed personal items around my bed, photographs of myself, objects with strong memories attached, a notebook with my handwriting. I repeated my name, address, and personal details like a mantra as I lay down. Despite my precautions, I slipped into another dream. This time was different. I was a woman named Rebecca Torres, but the dream was fragmented, shifting. Sometimes I was fully immersed in her experience, feeling her emotions and sensations. Other times I was more like an observer, aware of my own identity separate from hers. When the moment of death came, a sudden aneurysm, I felt it but remained partially detached. The next night was similar. I was an older man named Patrick Doyle, but my connection to him flickered, sometimes strong, sometimes tenuous. When he died in his sleep, I felt myself being pulled back to my own body, rather than being dragged into the darkness with him. For 2 weeks, this pattern continued. The dreams didn't stop, but my separation from them grew. I continued my rituals, adding new elements, recording messages to myself to play during sleep, wearing distinctive clothing to bed that I'd never seen anyone wear in my dreams. Then came the night I dreamed of Anna Weiss. She was about my age, lived in my city, and had a similar lifestyle. The connection was stronger than it had been recently, possibly because of our similarities. I followed her evening routine with growing unease. When she went to bed, I tried to pull away to wake myself up but couldn't. As she drifted off to sleep, I felt the familiar harbinger of death, but this time, it wasn't a heart attack or stroke or peaceful cessation of breath. It was a presence in her room, a shadowy figure standing beside her bed, watching her sleep. In the dream, Anna's eyes opened. She saw the figure and opened her mouth to scream, but a hand pale and unnaturally long-fingered covered her face. I felt her terror, her desperate struggle for air. And then, darkness. I woke gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. This wasn't a natural death. This was murder, and it might not have happened yet. I grabbed my phone, 37, without thinking. I searched for Anna Weiss in my city. There she was, a social media profile with the same face I'd seen in my dream. She worked at a local bank, lived in the West Side neighborhood. I called the police, gave them her address from the dream, told them a woman was in danger. The dispatcher was skeptical, but said they'd send someone to check. I paced my apartment, waiting for news, jumping at every notification on my phone. Morning came with no updates. I searched local news sites. Nothing about an Anna Weiss. Had I prevented something? Or had it not been real this time? I couldn't be sure. That night I was afraid to sleep, but even more afraid of what might happen if I didn't. What if I missed another warning, another chance to help? I performed my rituals with extra care and lay down, clutching a photograph of myself. The dream came quickly. I was Anna Weiss again. She was alive, going about her evening. Everything was the same as the previous dream. The same dinner, the same television show, the same bedtime routine. Had I experienced a premonition? Was this the actual night of her death? But something was different. As Anna prepared for bed, she checked her locks twice, looked in her closets, and placed a kitchen knife on her bedside table. She'd been warned. The police must have taken my call seriously enough to alert her. Anna eventually fell into an uneasy sleep. I waited, tense within her dreaming mind, for the shadowy figure to appear. Hours seemed to pass. Nothing happened. Dawn approached, light beginning to filter through her curtains. Then I felt a shift in the atmosphere of the room. A presence, but not beside the bed this time. It was closer, inside. With growing horror, I realized the presence was me, my consciousness inside Anna's mind. And Anna was becoming aware of it too. In her sleep she grew restless, her breathing quickening. I felt her mind pushing against mine, trying to expel the foreign presence. I tried to withdraw, to wake myself up, but couldn't. Anna's eyes flew open. She sat up in bed, clutching her head. "Who's there?" she whispered to her empty room. "Who's in my head?" I tried to retreat, to make myself smaller, but my panic only seemed to make my presence more obvious to her. She began to hyperventilate, clawing at her scalp, as if trying to physically remove me. "Get out," she screamed. "Get out of my head." I felt her heart racing dangerously fast, her blood pressure spiking. This wasn't supposed to happen. The people in my dreams never knew I was there. They couldn't feel me, but Anna could, and my presence was hurting her. With all my mental strength, I tried to pull away, to sever the connection. For a moment I felt it working, the link between us stretching thin. Then Anna collapsed back onto her bed, her body convulsing. A seizure, caused by my intrusion. I watched helpless, as she thrashed, as foam gathered at the corners of her mouth, as her movements gradually weakened. Then stillness, silence. The connection between us dissolved, and I woke in my own bed screaming. I knew what had happened. I'd killed her, not with a shadowy hand over her mouth, but with my presence in her mind. The figure I'd seen in my first dream of Anna hadn't been an intruder in her room. It had been a representation of me, of my invading consciousness. The next day, I found the news article. Anna Weiss, 34, found dead in her apartment. Cause of death, apparent seizure. No signs of foul play, though police had conducted a welfare check. The previous day, based on an anonymous tip, I was the killer in my dreams. Perhaps I had been all along. That realization broke something in me. I stopped trying to sleep altogether. I used stimulants, slapped myself awake. Whenever I felt myself drifting off, played loud music through headphones. But human beings can't survive without sleep indefinitely. On the third day of forced wakefulness, as I sat at my kitchen table staring at my untouched coffee, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. My voice was hoarse from exhaustion. Mr. Harrison. A woman's voice, familiar somehow. Yes, this is Dr. Eleanor Patel. I need to warn you. After our meeting, I did some more research into the somnexia trials. There's something I didn't tell you. I gripped the phone tighter. What is it? The two participants who never recovered, they didn't just fall into vegetative states, their consciousness, it seems to have been displaced. The researchers theorized that they became permanently trapped in the consciousness field, unable to return to their bodies. What are you saying? I'm saying they might still be out there, conscious but bodiless, and they might be looking for a way back. A chill ran through me. A way back. How? A suitable host. Someone whose consciousness has become untethered enough to be replaceable. The room seemed to tilt around me, like me. Yes, the company has been monitoring former trial participants and recent somnexia users who report similar experiences to yours. There have been incidents. What kind of incidents? Personality changes. People who suddenly become different overnight. Family members report they seem like completely different people inhabiting familiar bodies. I thought of the dreams, how they'd changed. How I'd started as a passive observer, but had somehow become an active presence, detectable to Anna. What if I hadn't been the only consciousness visiting her that night? What if someone had followed me in? How do I protect myself? I asked. You need to ground yourself firmly in your own identity, and you need to stop the dreams completely.
I've tried.
Nothing works. There's one thing that might. It's experimental. But the line went dead. I tried calling back, but the number was no longer in service. I threw the phone across the room in frustration. That night, despite my fear, my body finally surrendered to exhaustion. As I felt sleep claiming me, I made one last desperate attempt to protect myself. I focused on my name, my memories, everything that made me who I was. I imagined barriers around my mind, impenetrable walls. The dream came anyway. But I wasn't inside someone else this time. I was in a strange, formless space, not quite darkness, not quite light. And I wasn't alone. They surrounded me, dozens of them. People of all ages, all types. Some I recognized from my dreams. Robert, Sarah, Michael, and others. Some were strangers. All watched me with the same hungry expression. Who are you? I asked, my voice echoing strangely in the void. A man stepped forward, tall, thin, with hollow eyes. We are the displaced, the wanderers, the ones who found the way out but can't find the way back. Back where? To life, to bodies, to existence. Another figure moved closer, a woman with long gray hair. You've been opening doors without knowing it, creating pathways. We've been following you, watching you learn. The dreams, I said. The deaths. Necessary, said the first man. The transition points are the only places where the barriers are thin enough to cross. What do you want from me? They all smiled then. A terrible synchronized expression. You've weakened your tether, said the woman. Your consciousness slips more easily from your body than most. You've created a vacancy. Understanding dawned with horrific clarity. You want to take my place. Only one of us can, said the man. The others must wait for another opportunity. Another dreamer like you. They began to move toward me, closing in slowly. I tried to back away but had nowhere to go in this formless space. This isn't real, I said desperately. This is just another dream. Is it? Asked the woman, now close enough that I could feel her breath cold and stale on my face. How can you be sure? Where do dreams end and reality begin for someone like you? Someone who walks between worlds? I closed my eyes, concentrating with all my might on waking up, on returning to my body. I felt a pull, a sense of rising, but dozens of cold, desperate hands clutched at me, trying to hold me in place. "You can't leave," hissed the man. "One of us is coming with you." I fought harder, focusing on the physical sensations of my real body, the sheets against my skin, the pillow under my head, the rhythm of my breathing. The hands began to slip away, all except one that maintained its grip on my wrist. With a final surge of effort, I broke free, feeling myself rushing upward, back toward consciousness. As I did, I heard the man's voice one last time. "It doesn't matter. The door is open now, we'll find you again. And again, until one of us takes your place." I woke with a violent start, my heart pounding. Just a nightmare, I told myself, just a nightmare. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness of my bedroom, I noticed something on my wrist, 5 distinct bruises, like finger marks, exactly where I'd been gripped in the dream. And in the corner of my room, barely visible in the shadows, stood a figure watching me. As I stared, it smiled with my face and said in my voice, "Don't worry, it's not your time. Not yet, but I'll be waiting in your dreams." I haven't slept since that night. I can't. I know they're waiting for me. Dr. Patel hasn't answered any of my messages. The bruises on my wrist haven't faded. And sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I still see that figure, my doppelganger, watching me, waiting for exhaustion to claim me again. I don't know how much longer I can stay awake. My thoughts are becoming disjointed. Reality feels thin, permeable. I keep catching myself in microsleeps, brief moments of unconsciousness where I'm instantly back in that formless void, with those hungry entities. If you're reading this, consider it a warning. Be careful what you put in your body, what doors you might be opening. And if your doctor prescribes something called somnexia, run as far and as fast as you can. Because some dreams aren't meant to be visited. And some dreamers aren't meant to return alone. Story 3. I never used to pay much attention to shadows. They were simply dark areas where light couldn't reach, nothing more than the absence of illumination. That was before I took the job as an urban planner for the city's historical district renovation project. Before I noticed the wall, my name is Daniel Mercer. I've been working in urban development for nearly a decade, specializing in balancing modern needs with historical preservation. When the City Council approved the revitalization plan for Old Town, a neglected district with buildings dating back to the 1800s, I was thrilled to be appointed as the lead planner. The project represented everything I loved about my work, breathing new life into forgotten spaces while honoring their history. The first phase involved extensive documentation. I spent weeks walking the narrow cobblestone streets, photographing buildings, measuring alleyways, and noting architectural features worth preserving. That's how I found myself in Blackwell Alley, a narrow passage between 2 Victorian-era commercial buildings, on a crisp autumn afternoon. The alley itself wasn't remarkable, perhaps 12 feet wide, with high brick walls on either side. What caught my attention was the northern wall. Unlike the weathered red brick of the surrounding structures, this wall was constructed of large grayish-black stones fitted together with remarkable precision. It stood about 15 feet tall and ran the entire length of the alley, approximately 60 feet. Something about it seemed wrong. The stone appeared almost unnaturally smooth in places, as if polished by countless hands over centuries. More strikingly, while the opposite brick wall was covered in the expected urban grime, this stone wall appeared clean, almost pristine. Fascinating material, I muttered to myself, approaching to examine it more closely. I reached out to touch the surface, expecting coldness, but instead found it oddly warm. The sensation sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. As I pulled my hand away, I noticed something else peculiar. Despite the overcast day, my shadow was projected with unusual clarity against the dark stone. The outline was sharp, defined, almost more substantial than it should have been. I moved my arm experimentally, watching as my shadow mimicked the motion with perfect precision. I took several photographs and measurements, making notes about the unusual wall for my report. According to my research later that day, the wall predated everything else in the area. Historical records indicated it was part of the original settlement's fortifications, built in the late 1700s. What those records failed to explain was why this single section remained when all other portions had been demolished centuries ago. For the next phase of my project, I needed data on pedestrian traffic patterns. I installed small, unobtrusive cameras at various locations throughout Old Town, including one at each end of Blackwell Alley. The cameras were motion-activated and would provide valuable information about how people currently navigated the space essential for planning improvements. A week later, I sat in my office reviewing the footage. Most of it was exactly what I expected. Sparse foot traffic, primarily locals using the alleyways as shortcuts. But when I reached the Blackwell Alley recordings, something strange caught my attention. At first, I couldn't quite identify what bothered me. The footage showed people walking through the alley, their shadows stretching across the stone wall as they passed. Nothing unusual, but as I continued watching, a pattern emerged that made my blood run cold. During certain times, specifically during the transitional light of dusk, the number of shadows on the wall didn't match the number of people walking through the alley. I rewound the footage, counting carefully. 3 people walked through, but 4 distinct shadows moved across the stone surface. I checked another clip from a different day. 2 pedestrians, 3 shadows. This has to be some kind of optical illusion, I said aloud, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Perhaps reflections from windows in adjacent buildings. Maybe some quirk of the camera's image processing. I decided to witness it myself. That evening, I positioned myself at the entrance of Blackwell Alley just before sunset. Notebook in hand, ostensibly taking measurements, but actually watching the interplay of light and shadow. An elderly man entered the alley from the opposite end, walking slowly with the aid of a cane. As he passed the midpoint, the dying sunlight cast his shadow against the stone wall. I watched, breath held, as his silhouette stretched across the ancient surface. Then, just as he was about to exit my end of the alley, I saw his shadow seemed to linger on the wall for several seconds after he had moved past, before finally sliding away to rejoin him. I blinked hard, convinced my eyes were playing tricks, but when a young couple walked through moments later, I observed the same phenomenon. Their shadows appeared to resist leaving the wall, stretching unnaturally before finally detaching. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying what I'd seen, trying to find a rational explanation. The next morning, bleary-eyed from lack of rest, I was scrolling through local news when a headline caught my attention. Local resident missing, last seen in Old Town. The article described how Martin Geller, 67, had failed to return home after running errands in the historical district 2 days earlier. The accompanying photo showed a thin, elderly man with a cane, the same man whose shadow I had watched linger on the wall. My hands trembled as I pulled up the camera footage again. There he was, walking through Blackwell Alley at 5:43 p.m. According to the news report, that was the last confirmed sighting of Martin Geller. Coincidence, I told myself. It had to be, but a nagging voice in my head wouldn't let it go. I began researching missing persons cases in the area over the past year. The results were disturbing. 7 people had disappeared within a 5-block radius of Blackwell Alley. None of the cases had been solved. The police had found no connections between the victims' different ages, backgrounds, no shared acquaintances. But I had access to something the police didn't. My cameras. With growing dread, I reviewed weeks of footage, focusing on the dates of the disappearances. In each case, I found the missing person walking through Blackwell Alley within 24 hours of their disappearance. And in each case, their shadow behaved strangely on the stone wall. I needed to learn more about the wall itself. The city archives yielded little beyond what I already knew. It was old, part of the original settlement, historically protected. But in a dusty file of local folklore collected by a librarian in the 1950s, I found something chilling. According to local legend, The wall had once been part of a public execution site. Criminals were hanged against it, their shadows cast upon the stone at the moment of death. The stories claimed the wall remembered those who passed by it, particularly those marked by death or tragedy. One account from 1879 described how a local man insisted the wall was collecting shadows, claiming he had seen more shadows than people when passing by at dusk. He was later committed to an asylum. I should have walked away then, should have requested reassignment to another project, cited personal reasons, anything to distance myself from Blackwell Alley and its hungry wall. But professional curiosity, or perhaps something darker, kept me involved. I decided to conduct a more controlled observation. I set up a chair at the entrance of the alley one evening, equipped with my camera and a thermos of coffee, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. I watched and waited. The first few pedestrians passed without incident, their shadows behaving normally, following their owners faithfully. But as true dusk settled in that magical time, when artificial lights and fading natural light create a unique interplay of illumination, I witnessed it again. A young woman walked briskly through the alley, phone in hand, completely absorbed in her screen. As she passed the midpoint of the wall, her shadow seemed to stretch, as if reluctant to follow. When she reached the end of the alley, something happened that made me drop my coffee. Her shadow separated from her feet, just slightly, perhaps 6 inches, but unmistakably detached. She continued walking, oblivious, while her shadow struggled for a moment before snapping back to her like an elastic band stretched too far. I raised my camera with trembling hands, but it was too late to capture the anomaly. The woman disappeared around the corner, unaware of what had almost happened. Over the next hour, I observed similar occurrences with varying intensity. Some shadows showed only the slightest reluctance to leave the wall, while others demonstrated alarming independence, lagging several feet behind their owners before finally rejoining them. Then came the moment that still haunts my nightmares. An elderly woman entered the alley, moving slowly with a slight limp. Her shadow fell sharply against the stone wall, unusually dark and defined. As she approached the midpoint, her shadow began to behave strangely, not just lagging behind, but moving in ways that didn't match her actions. When she paused to adjust her scarf, her shadow continued walking along the wall. The woman didn't notice. No one ever noticed. As she resumed walking, her shadow seemed to be pulled in 2 directions, following her while simultaneously being drawn into the wall itself. The silhouette stretched, distorted, and then horrifyingly split in 2. One shadow continued following the woman as she exited the alley. The other remained on the wall, a perfect silhouette that gradually sank into the stone until it disappeared completely. I sat frozen, unable to process what I'd witnessed. Had I imagined it? Was I experiencing some kind of psychotic break? But the footage from my camera later confirmed everything, including the fact that the woman's shadow appeared noticeably fainter after leaving the alley. I spent the next day researching everything I could about the woman, terrified I would find a missing person report. To my relief, there was nothing. At least not yet. I tried to warn people. I really did. I approached the Historical Society first, presenting my findings as concerning structural anomalies with the wall. They dismissed my worries, reminding me the wall was protected by preservation laws. Next, I went to my supervisor, suggesting we reroute pedestrian traffic away from Blackwell Alley during the renovation. He laughed, asking if I'd been working too hard. Finally, in desperation, I contacted the police, attempting to establish connections between the missing persons and the alley. The detective listened politely before suggesting I might want to talk to someone about my theories. No one believed me. Why would they? It sounded insane, a wall that collected shadows, that somehow caused people to disappear. I wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. I considered my options. I could walk away from the project, from the city entirely, start fresh somewhere else, try to forget what I'd seen. But what about the people who would continue to pass through that alley? What about the shadows that would continue to be harvested? I decided on a compromise. I would include a recommendation in my renovation plan to install bright lighting in Blackwell Alley, powerful enough to eliminate shadows entirely. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it might help. In the meantime, I continued my observations, documenting everything. I noticed patterns emerging. The wall seemed most active at dusk and dawn, when light was transitional. It appeared to prefer certain types of people, the elderly, the ill, those who walked alone, and most disturbing of all, those whose shadows were partially taken often appeared in missing persons reports within weeks. It was as if the wall was tasting them first. One evening, as I sat at my usual observation point, an old man approached me. He was thin and stooped, with eyes that seemed too knowing. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" he asked without preamble. My heart raced. "Seen what?" "The wall, how it takes them." He nodded toward Blackwell Alley. "Been happening for centuries. Why do you think they kept that section standing when they tore down the rest?" "Who are you?" I demanded. "Name's Harold. Used to be the night watchman for this district, 30 years ago." He settled beside me with a grunt. "Saw things nobody would believe. Tried to warn people, same as you're doing. Got the same response, I expect." "Why does no one notice?" I asked. "How can your shadow be taken, and you don't feel it?" Harold gave a bitter laugh. "Would you notice if your shadow went missing? Most people never look. And by the time they do realize something's wrong, that they feel somehow less than they were, it's too late." "What happens to them?" "The people who lose their shadows completely." His face darkened. "They fade. Not right away. Takes weeks, sometimes months. They get sick, depressed. Doctors can't find anything wrong. Eventually they just disappear. Family reports them missing, but there's nothing to find." "But why? What does the wall want with shadows?" Harold was quiet for a long moment. "What's a shadow but a piece of yourself? Your essence, projected outside your body. The wall takes that essence, adds it to itself, gets stronger with each one it collects." "That's insane," I whispered, though I knew it wasn't. "There's a reason that wall has stood for 300 years when buildings all around it have crumbled," Harold said. "It sustains itself, and it's patient." He left me with one final warning. "Don't let it get your shadow, son. Once it gets a taste, it'll want the rest." That night, I couldn't sleep. Harold's words echoed in my mind. I pulled up the footage from my cameras again, watching the shadows stretch and separate in the eerie glow of my computer screen. Then I noticed something I'd missed before. In several instances, just before a shadow began to separate from its owner, there appeared to be another shadow, faint but distinct, moving independently along the wall, as if something was reaching out from within the stone. The next day, I made my decision. Scientific curiosity, or perhaps foolish bravery, drove me to conduct one final experiment. I would document the wall's phenomenon in irrefutable detail, with multiple cameras from multiple angles. If I could capture clear evidence, someone would have to believe me. I arrived at Blackwell Alley an hour before sunset, setting up 3 high-definition cameras at different positions, one at each end of the alley, and one directly opposite the wall itself. I also brought a light meter to measure any fluctuations and a thermal camera to detect temperature changes. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, I positioned myself near the center of the alley, directly facing the ancient wall. The stone seemed to absorb the fading light, appearing darker than it should have been given the ambient conditions. I began my documentation, speaking clearly into a digital recorder. October 17th, 6:43 p.m. Beginning observation of shadow anomalies on the north wall of Blackwell Alley. Current temperature is 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Light level diminishing as sun sets. For the first 20 minutes, nothing unusual occurred. A few pedestrians passed through, their shadows behaving normally on the wall. I began to worry that the presence of my equipment might somehow be deterring the phenomenon. Then, as true dusk settled in that critical period when natural light and artificial illumination create unique shadow effects, I noticed the temperature drop suddenly. My breath fogged in front of me as the thermal camera's display showed the wall's surface temperature rising by several degrees. Temperature drop noted in ambient air. I recorded, wall surface showing increased thermal activity. That's when I saw it, my own shadow on the wall began to move independently of my actions. While I stood perfectly still, the silhouette shifted slightly as if testing its range of motion. Fear paralyzed me momentarily, but professional instinct took over. shadow displaying autonomous movement. I continued recording, voice shaking, subject myself remaining stationary while shadow exhibits independent motion. The movement became more pronounced. My shadow raised an arm while my actual arm remained at my side. It turned its head, seeming to look directly at me from the wall. I should have run. Every instinct screamed for me to flee. But I couldn't abandon my documentation. Not when I was finally capturing definitive evidence. Shadow now completely independent of subject movements. I whispered into the recorder. Appears to be observing me. What happened next occurred with terrifying speed. My shadow seemed to step forward, separating from the wall while still maintaining my silhouette. It was like watching a three-dimensional cutout of darkness emerge from the stone surface. I stumbled backward, finally giving in to panic. Shadow detaching from wall surface. I gasped into the recorder, moving independently in three-dimensional space. The shadow figure stood between me and the wall now, a perfect silhouette of myself composed of absolute darkness. No features were visible, just a person-shaped void that somehow conveyed a sense of hunger. I turned to run, but found my feet wouldn't move. Looking down in horror, I saw tendrils of darkness extending from the shadow figure, wrapping around my ankles like smoky chains. Help! I screamed, hoping someone would hear, would come to my aid. But Blackwell Alley remained deserted. The shadow figure approached slowly, each step bringing a deeper chill to the air around me. When it stood directly before me, this perfect darkness in my own shape, it raised its hand to my face in an almost gentle gesture. "What do you want?" I whispered. It didn't answer, couldn't answer. But somehow I understood. It wanted completion. My shadow had been partially taken during my many observation sessions at the wall. This fragment had grown stronger, fed by the wall's collection, until it could manifest independently. Now it wanted the rest of me. With tremendous effort, I reached for the flash attachment on my camera. If the wall fed on shadows, perhaps intense light would repel it. My fingers closed around the device and I triggered the flash directly at the shadow figure. A sound like 1,000 whispers screaming filled the alley as the figure recoiled. The tendrils around my ankles loosened momentarily, and I seized the opportunity to run. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely insert the key. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror and felt my heart nearly stop. My reflection had no shadow. That was 3 weeks ago. I've submitted my renovation recommendations for Old Town, including a proposal for extremely bright, shadow-eliminating lighting throughout Blackwell Alley. I cited security concerns as the justification. The plan was approved, and installation begins next month, but I fear it may be too late for me. Each day, I feel more insubstantial, as if parts of me are fading away. My reflection grows fainter in mirrors. Photos of me appear increasingly blurred. People seem to look through me in conversations, as if they can't quite focus on my presence. Yesterday, I returned to Blackwell Alley one last time, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't resist. Standing before the ancient wall, I placed my palm against its warm surface, and felt a horrible sense of recognition of coming home. In the fading light I saw dozens of shadows moving across the wall's surface, independent of any physical bodies. Among them was one that matched my silhouette perfectly, beckoning to me. I understand now what Harold meant. The wall has had a taste of me, and it won't stop until it has consumed me completely. Each night I barricade my doors and surround myself with lights, fighting to keep the darkness at bay. But I know it's only a matter of time. If you're reading this account, please heed my warning. Pay attention to your shadow. Make sure it follows you faithfully, that it doesn't linger or behave strangely. And whatever you do, stay away from Blackwell Alley at dusk. Because in that ancient passage against that hungry wall, you might leave behind more than just a momentary silhouette. You might leave a piece of yourself that can never be reclaimed, a fragment of your essence that will join the collection of the shadows that came before, forever trapped in cold stone, forever watching for the next passerby. And if you see me there, or rather, my shadow, please understand that it isn't me anymore. I'm elsewhere, fading a little more each day, becoming one with the darkness that claimed me. Remember, not all shadows are cast by light. Some are cast by the absence of self. Story 4. I've always been a creature of habit. My apartment, a modest one-bedroom on the 14th floor of a downtown high-rise, has been my sanctuary for the past 3 years. As a pharmaceutical sales representative, I spend roughly half of each month on the road, living out of hotel rooms and rental cars. When I'm home, I cherish the familiarity, the predictability. Everything has its place. Everything follows a pattern. Or at least, it used to. The first time I noticed something was wrong was on a Tuesday evening in late October. I had just returned from a 5-day conference in Boston, exhausted and craving the comfort of my own space. As I wheeled my suitcase through the door, I felt a strange sensation, a subtle wrongness that I couldn't immediately identify. The apartment looked the same as when I'd left it. The furniture was where it should be. The dishes were clean and put away, and yet something felt off. I dropped my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, a habit ingrained over years, and that's when I noticed it. The bowl had moved, not dramatically, just an inch or two to the left of where it always sat. I stared at it for a moment, then shook my head. I was tired, I reasoned. My perception was skewed by exhaustion and travel stress. But as I moved through the apartment, other small discrepancies began to reveal themselves. The throw pillows on my couch were arranged differently, not haphazardly, but in a deliberate pattern that wasn't mine. The coffee table books had been rearranged, with my architecture volume now on top instead of the photography collection that I preferred. In the kitchen, my coffee mugs had been reorganized, with my favorite one, souvenir from Seattle, now pushed to the back of the cabinet instead of front and center where I always kept it. Did someone come in while I was gone? I wondered aloud, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet apartment. I called the building manager, who assured me that no one had entered my unit, no maintenance requests, no emergency access, nothing. When I asked about the cleaning service I occasionally used, he confirmed they hadn't been scheduled during my absence. I hung up feeling more unsettled than before. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about those small inexplicable changes. They were so minor that I might not have noticed them if I weren't so particular about my living space. Yet they were undeniably real. Someone or something had been in my apartment while I was away. In the morning, I convinced myself I was overreacting. Perhaps I had moved those items before leaving, and simply forgotten. Stress and travel could do strange things to memory. I resolved to put it out of my mind, and get back to my routine. For 2 weeks, everything was normal. I worked from home, caught up on paperwork, and prepared for my next trip. The incident faded from my thoughts, becoming nothing more than a curious anecdote. Then I left for Chicago. 3 days of meetings with hospital administrators and doctors' offices. When I returned on Friday night, the feeling hit me immediately, that same sense of wrongness, but stronger this time. The television remote was on the left side of the coffee table, instead of the right. My reading glasses were folded neatly beside my bedside lamp, though I distinctly remembered leaving them in their case in the drawer. The shower curtain was closed, not open as I always left it to prevent mildew. And most disturbingly, there was a damp towel hanging in the bathrooms, lightly damp, as if it had been used hours ago and had nearly dried. I stood in my bathroom staring at that towel, my heart pounding. This was not forgetfulness or an overactive imagination. Someone had been here. Someone had used my shower. I searched the apartment thoroughly, looking for signs of forced entry or missing valuables. Nothing was stolen. Not my laptop. Not the cash I kept in my desk drawer. Not the expensive watch my father had given me for graduation. If this was a break-in, it was the strangest one imaginable. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I sat in my living room with the lights on, jumping at every sound from the hallway or neighboring apartments. Around 3 a.m., I made a decision. I would install security cameras. The next day was Saturday. I went to an electronics store and purchased a comprehensive home security system. 3 cameras that connected to my phone, allowing me to monitor my apartment from anywhere. I installed one in the living room, one in the hallway facing the front door, and one in my bedroom. The system would activate based on motion detection and record continuously when triggered. With the cameras in place, I felt better. Whatever was happening, I would have evidence. If someone was entering my apartment, I would know who and how. My next trip was scheduled for Wednesday, a quick overnight to Philadelphia. Before leaving, I double-checked the camera system, ensured it was properly armed, and headed out with a sense of grim determination. Whoever my uninvited guest was, they would be caught this time. Throughout my meetings in Philadelphia, I periodically checked the camera feed on my phone. Nothing unusual appeared. No motion alerts, no unexpected activity. I began to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing, if stress had finally caught up with me in the form of paranoid delusions. I returned home Thursday evening, bracing myself for that now familiar sense of intrusion. But this time, everything seemed normal. The apartment looked exactly as I had left it. Relief washed over me as I checked each room, finding nothing out of place. Perhaps the cameras had deterred my mysterious visitor. That night, I reviewed the footage from the past 36 hours. The cameras had captured my departure on Wednesday morning and my return just now. Between those events, there was nothing, no movement, no intruders, no explanation for the previous incidents. I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, convinced that whatever had been happening was now resolved. The security system had worked, not by catching someone, but by scaring them away. This sense of security lasted exactly 12 days. My next trip was longer, a full week in Seattle for a national sales conference. I left on a Sunday, scheduled to return the following Saturday. The cameras were active, my phone was fully charged, and I felt confident that my apartment would remain undisturbed in my absence. For the first few days, I checked the camera feeds regularly. Nothing unusual appeared. By Wednesday, I had relaxed enough to focus fully on the conference, only glancing at the app occasionally. On Thursday night, something strange happened. I opened the app around 11 p.m. 8 p.m. Seattle time, and found that I couldn't connect to the cameras. The app showed them as offline. I tried troubleshooting, checking my internet connection, restarting the app, even rebooting my phone, but nothing worked. The cameras remained inaccessible. Panic began to build in my chest. I called my neighbor Elena, who had a spare key for emergencies. Despite the late hours, she agreed to check on my apartment. 20 minutes later, she called back. "Everything looks fine," she assured me. "The door was locked. Nothing seems disturbed. Maybe it's just a power outage or internet problem in your unit." I thanked her and tried to calm myself. There were logical explanations for technical failures. No need to assume the worst. The next morning, the cameras were back online. I scrolled through the recorded footage, looking for any clues about what had caused the outage. What I found made my blood run cold. The cameras had not simply gone offline. There was a gap in the footage, a perfect clean gap from 7:42 p.m. to 11:37 p.m. Seattle time. Before and after this window, the apartment was empty. And still, during those missing hours, there was nothing. No static, no darkness, just an absence of data, as if that time had never existed. I called the security company's technical support. After reviewing the logs remotely, the representative confirmed what I feared. The system hadn't experienced a technical failure. It had been deliberately disabled and then reactivated. Someone with access to your network and the system password turned it off and then back on, he explained. There's no other explanation for this kind of interruption pattern. But that was impossible. No one had my password except me, and no one should have been in my apartment to access my network in the first place. I spent the remainder of the conference in a state of distraction, counting the hours until I could return home and investigate further. When Saturday finally arrived, I took the earliest flight available, rushing from the airport to my apartment without even stopping to grab coffee. As the elevator carried me to the 14th floor, my heart hammered against my ribs. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew something was terribly wrong. The The moment I opened my door, I knew someone had been there. Not because things were out of place, in fact everything looked immaculate, but because the apartment smelled different. There was a faint scent of unfamiliar cologne hanging in the air, subtle but undeniable. I moved through the room slowly, cataloging every detail. The bed was made with hospital corners, though I never made my bed that way. The shower had been used. There were water droplets on the glass door that hadn't fully dried. A coffee mug sat in the dish drainer, recently washed. Most disturbing of all, when I opened my laptop, I found it had been used. The browser history showed searches from the previous evening news sites, weather forecasts, even my own company's website. Searches I hadn't made. I sat down heavily on the couch, trying to process what was happening. Someone was not just entering my apartment. They were living in it while I was away, using my shower, my dishes, my computer, sleeping in my bed. But why? And how were they getting in? There were no signs of forced entry, and the building had good security. A random burglar wouldn't take such risks repeatedly, especially without stealing anything valuable. That's when a chilling thought occurred to me. What if it wasn't a stranger? What if it was someone who had access to my apartment? Someone who knew my routine? I began making a mental list of people who had keys: the building manager, the emergency maintenance staff, Elena from next door. None seemed like plausible suspects. The building manager was a 60-year-old man who had worked here for decades without incident. The maintenance staff consisted of a team that always worked together, never alone, and Elena was a close friend who had no reason to secretly use my apartment. She had her own identical unit right next door. As I pondered this mystery, my phone rang. It was my boss, checking if I'd made it home safely from Seattle. "Yeah, just got in," I told him. "Hey, weird question, did you ever give my apartment key to anyone else from the company? Like for emergencies or something?" There was a pause on the line. "No, why would I have a key to your apartment?" "I don't know, I just thought." I trailed off, realizing how paranoid I sounded. "Everything okay, Mark?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yeah, fine, just tired from travel. I'll see you at the office on Monday." After hanging up, I decided I needed more information before involving the police. They would likely dismiss my concerns without concrete evidence of a crime. No theft, no vandalism, just some slightly moved objects and a mysterious gap in security footage. I needed to catch this person in the act. That evening, I developed a plan. I would pretend to leave for another business trip but actually stay in town, monitoring my apartment from a nearby hotel. I would set up additional hidden camera zones, not connected to my home network, and I would catch my uninvited guest red-handed. On Monday, I loudly discussed my upcoming trip to Denver, while on the phone in the hallway, making sure neighbors could overhear. I packed a suitcase and left it visibly by the door. I even booked a cancelable flight for Wednesday morning. On Tuesday night, I made a show of loading my suitcase into my car. I drove around the block, parked in a visitor spot on the other side of the building, and slipped back in through a side entrance. I checked into a hotel 2 blocks away, one with a clear view of my apartment building. From my hotel room, I could monitor both sets of cameras, the original system that my visitor knew about and might disable, and the new hidden cameras they wouldn't expect. Now it was just a matter of waiting. Wednesday passed uneventfully. I watched the feeds obsessively, but no one entered my apartment. I began to wonder if my plan had somehow been discovered. Thursday morning, at exactly 9:17 a.m., the original cameras went offline. My heart leapt into my throat as I switched to the hidden camera feeds. For several minutes nothing happened. Then at 9:22 a.m., my front door opened. A man entered my apartment. I stared at the grainy image on my phone screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The man moved with confidence, not like an intruder, but like someone returning home. He set down a briefcase, my briefcase, and hung his coat, my coat, in the closet. As he turned toward one of the hidden cameras, I finally saw his face clearly. He looked exactly like me. Not similar, not a resemblance, but identical in every way. Same face, same build, same haircut. He was even wearing clothes from my closet, a blue button-down shirt I'd purchased last month in gray slacks. I often wore to meetings. I felt the room spin around me. This couldn't be real. I was hallucinating, or the camera was malfunctioning, or this was an elaborate prank. But as I continued to watch, the man who was me moved through my apartment with perfect familiarity, knowing exactly where everything was kept. He made coffee using my precise method: 2 scoops of beans, ground for exactly 12 seconds, water heated to just below boiling. He sat at my desk and opened my laptop, logging in without hesitation. He even had my password. For hours, I watched this doppelganger live my life in my space. He took calls on a phone identical to mine. He reviewed documents that looked like my sales reports. He ate lunch at my kitchen counter, reading news sites I frequently visited. It was as if a perfect copy of me existed, and was simply taking my place when I was gone. By evening, I was shaking uncontrollably. This defied all rational explanation. I needed to confront this, whatever this was, directly. I called the police, trying to explain the situation without sounding completely insane. The dispatcher was skeptical, but agreed to send an officer to meet me at my building. As I waited in the lobby for the police to arrive, I continued watching the feed on my phone. The imposter was now sitting on my couch, watching my favorite show on Netflix, drinking tea from my mug. The casualness of it made the situation even more terrifying. When the officer arrived, a middle-aged woman named Rodriguez, according to her badge, I struggled to explain what was happening. Someone has broken into my apartment. I began. They're there right now. I have video proof. She nodded professionally. Let's go take a look. As we rode the elevator to the 14th floor, I showed her the live feed on my phone. See, that's not me. I mean, it looks like me, but I'm standing right here. Officer Rodriguez studied the screen, her expression unreadable. Sir, are you currently taking any medications, or have you recently stopped taking prescribed medications? What? No, this isn't a hallucination. There is literally someone in my apartment right now who looks exactly like me. She sighed. All right, let's check it out. Please stay behind me. When we reached my door, Officer Rodriguez knocked firmly. Police, open the door. There was no response. She knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I checked my phone. The feed showed the imposter still sitting on my couch, seemingly oblivious to the pounding at the door just feet away. He's in there. I insisted. I can see him right now on the camera. Officer Rodriguez gave me a concerned look. Do you have your key? With trembling hands, I unlocked the door. Officer Rodriguez entered first, hand near her weapon. I followed close behind, bracing myself for the impossible confrontation with my own double. The apartment was empty. The living room was exactly as I had left it on Tuesday night. The couch was vacant. The TV was off. There was no mug of tea. No sign anyone had been there at all. But that's impossible, I stammered, staring at my phone. The feed still showed the imposter sitting calmly on my couch. I looked up at the actual empty couch, then back at my phone. He's right there. How can you not see him? Officer Rodriguez's expression shifted from professional concern to something closer to pity. Sir, I think you might be experiencing some stress-related issues. Would you like me to call someone for you? A friend or family member, perhaps? No. Look. I thrust the phone at her. He's right there. She looked at the screen, then at the empty room. I see an empty apartment on this video, sir. The same empty apartment we're standing in right now. I pulled the phone back and stared at it in disbelief. The feed now showed exactly what Officer Rodriguez had described: an empty apartment. The imposter was gone, as if he had never been there at all. After Officer Rodriguez left with a strong recommendation that I seek mental health services, I sat in my apartment, questioning my own sanity. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I having some kind of breakdown? I reviewed the footage from the hidden cameras. There was nothing, no imposter, no mysterious visitor, just hours of an empty apartment. Even the gap in the original security system's footage wasn't there anymore. According to all evidence, no one had entered my apartment since I left on Tuesday. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, replaying everything in my mind, searching for some explanation that didn't involve me losing my grip on reality. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me, and I fell into a troubled sleep. I was awakened by the sound of my front door opening. Sunlight streamed through the windows. It was morning. I lay perfectly still, listening to footsteps moving through my apartment, confident, unhurried footsteps that sounded exactly like my own. The bedroom door was closed. I watched, paralyzed, as the handle slowly turned. The door swung open, and there I stood, looking at myself. The other me seemed as shocked as I was. For a long moment, we stared at each other in silence, identical faces frozen in identical expressions of disbelief. Then he spoke, his voice indistinguishable from mine. "You're not supposed to be here. Not today." My throat was dry, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. He tilted his head slightly, studying me with curious eyes. "I'm you, of course. Just not, right now, you." "That's not possible," I whispered. "And yet, here we are." He gestured between us. "There's been a scheduling error. You were supposed to be in Denver until Saturday." "I never went to Denver. That was a fake trip, to catch you." He nodded slowly. That explains it. The system usually prevents these kinds of overlaps." "What system? What are you talking about?" He sighed and leaned against the doorframe, a gesture so familiar it sent chills down my spine. It was exactly how I would stand in that exact situation. "Time isn't what you think it is," he said. "It's not linear. It's more like a shared apartment. Different versions of us occupy the same space at different moments. Usually we don't cross paths. The system makes sure of that." I sat up slowly, trying to process his words. "You're saying you're me from another time? Something like that?" He checked his watch. "My watch. The one my father gave me." "This is awkward. We're not supposed to meet. It complicates things." "What things?" "Continuity. Causality. The usual temporal headaches." He ran a hand through his hair. My gesture. My movement. "Look, I know this is a lot to take in. I had the same reaction when it happened to me. A terrible thought occurred to me." "When what happened to you?" He smiled my smile, but somehow wrong on his face. "When I met myself, of course. When I was you, sitting where you are now, having this exact conversation." The room seemed to tilt around me. "So you're me from the future." Future. Past. Those terms don't really apply once you understand how it works. Let's just say I'm you from elsewhere in our timeline. And you've been. What? Living in my apartment when I'm not here. He nodded. "Just as you'll do in other moments. We share this space across time. When you're traveling, other versions of you use the apartment. It's efficient, but I never agreed to this." "You will." His expression turned serious. "You have to. It's already happened, from my perspective." I shook my head, trying to clear it. "This is insane. I'm calling the police again. They won't see me. No one can see both of us simultaneously except ourselves. That's part of the system's protection." I remembered Officer Rodriguez seeing an empty apartment on the security feed, while I saw my doppelganger. "Why is this happening?" He shrugged. "Why does anything happen? Time is broken. Or maybe it was always like this and we're just now noticing. The important thing is that we've worked out an arrangement. A timeshare, if you will." He smiled at his own joke. "I never agreed to any arrangement," I insisted. "Not yet. But you will. Because the alternative is much worse." "What alternative?" His expression darkened. "Temporal collapse. If we don't maintain the system, if we don't keep to the schedule, everything unravels. Not just for us, but for everyone connected to our timeline." I stared at him, searching for any sign that this was an elaborate hoax. But looking into his eyes was like looking into a mirror. I recognized every fleck in the iris, every line around the edges. This was me, somehow impossibly. So what happens now? I asked finally. Now we fixed the scheduling error. He pulled out a phone identical to mine. According to this, you're supposed to be in Denver until Saturday. I'm scheduled for the apartment until then, and I'm just supposed to. What? Disappear? Go to Denver for real? That would be the simplest solution. Yes. I stood up, anger replacing shock. This is my apartment. My life. You can't just. It's our apartment, he interrupted. Our life. And believe me, I understand your frustration. I felt the same way when I was you. Stop saying that. You're not me. But I am. His voice was gentle now, almost sympathetic. And someday soon you'll be standing where I am, explaining this to another version of us who's just discovering the arrangement. The implications of what he was saying began to sink in. If he was telling the truth, then this cycle had happened before and would happen again. An endless loop of discovery and denial. How many of us are there? I asked. Dozens, maybe hundreds. The system doesn't let us know the full extent. It's safer that way. I sat back down on the bed, suddenly exhausted. And we all just share this life. Take turns existing. It's not as bad as it sounds once you get used to it. There's a certain freedom in it, knowing that time isn't the prison we thought it was. I looked up at him at myself and saw something in his eyes I hadn't noticed before, a profound loneliness, a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. Are you happy? I asked suddenly. The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment his carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. Happiness is complicated when you exist across multiple temporal planes, he said finally. But I'm at peace with the arrangement. I didn't believe him. I could read my own face too well. What if I refuse? What if I don't go to Denver? Don't follow your schedule? His expression hardened. Then you risk collapsing the entire system, and trust me, you don't want to see what happens then. You're threatening me. I'm warning you. As myself, I feel obligated to do that much. We stared at each other in silence, two versions of the same person at an impossible impasse. Finally he sighed. Look, I know this is overwhelming. It was for me too, but fighting it only makes things worse. The system exists for a reason. What reason? Balance. Equilibrium across the temporal spectrum. Without it, he trailed off, looking suddenly distant. I've seen what happens when the system fails. It's not pretty. Something in his tone sent a chill through me. What happens? Instead of answering, he pulled up his sleeve, revealing a scar on his forearm that I didn't have a long, jagged line from wrist to elbow. Some versions of us didn't accept the arrangement gracefully, he said quietly. The system had to correct those anomalies. The threat was clear, even if veiled in temporal techno-babble. So I either play along or suffer consequences. I prefer to think of it as accepting reality as it actually is, rather than how we wish it to be. He checked his watch again. You should pack. Your flight to Denver leaves in 3 hours. A flight I never booked. Check your email. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. Sure enough, there was a confirmation for a flight to Denver departing at 11:45 a.m. A flight I had no memory of booking. This isn't possible, I whispered. And yet, it's happening. He moved toward the door. I'll give you some privacy to pack. When you return on Saturday, I'll be gone, and the apartment will be exactly as you left it. That's how the system works when it's functioning properly. He paused at the doorway. One more thing. Don't try to tell anyone about this. Not your friends, not a therapist, no one. The system has ways of maintaining confidentiality. With that, he closed the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts and an impossible choice. I sat there for a long time, listening to him move around the apartment, my apartment with perfect familiarity. Every sound was exactly as it would be if I were the one making coffee, checking emails, living my normal morning routine. Eventually, I packed a bag. What choice did I have? If what he said was true, the consequences of disrupting this system could be dire. And if he was lying, if this was some elaborate psychological torture, then playing along might be my best chance to understand what was really happening. As I left the bedroom, he was sitting at my dining table, reading the news on my tablet. He looked up and nodded, as if this were the most normal situation in the world. "You're making the right choice," he said. "Am I? Or is that just what you remember yourself doing when you were me?" He smiled, that same unsettling smile that was mine, but not mine. "Both, I suppose. Safe travels." As I opened the front door to leave, a thought occurred to me. I turned back to face him. When exactly do I become you? When do I start? Sharing time? "Soon," he replied. "Sooner than you think." I nodded slowly, a cold certainty settling over me. "It's already happening, isn't it? The gaps in my memory, the lost time. I'm already part of the system." His expression confirmed my suspicion before he even spoke. "We all are, we always have been." I left then, closing the door on myself, walking away from my life, and toward a future I couldn't begin to comprehend. As the elevator descended, I checked my reflection in its mirrored wall, half expecting to see someone else staring back at me, but it was just my face, tired, confused, afraid. For now, at least, I was still me, still singular. I wondered how long that would last. The Denver flight was real. The hotel reservation was real. Everything was arranged perfectly, as if I had planned this trip myself. Perhaps, in some version of reality, I had that night, alone in my hotel room. I stood before the bathroom mirror and spoke to my reflection. "Are you there?" I asked. "Are you watching me now, waiting for your turn?" My reflection only mimicked my movements, offering no answers. But as I turned away, I could have sworn I saw it hesitate, just for a fraction of a second, before following my motion. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. By the time Saturday arrived, and I returned to my apartment, exhaustion had blurred the edges of reality. I half expected to find myself waiting at the door, but the apartment was empty, exactly as promised. Everything was in its place, with no sign that anyone, myself or otherwise, had been there in my absence. On the dining table, I found a note written in my handwriting. "Welcome to the arrangement. Your next scheduled absence begins Tuesday. Don't be late." I crumpled the note and threw it away. Then I checked my calendar. There it was, a business trip to Chicago starting Tuesday. A trip I had no memory of planning. I should have felt terrified, or at least angry. Instead, I felt a strange sense of resignation washing over me. Perhaps this had always been my reality, and I was only now becoming aware of it. That night, as I prepared for bed, I found myself carefully arranging the throw pillows on the couch in a specific pattern. Not my usual arrangement, but one that suddenly felt right. I moved my favorite coffee mug to the back of the cabinet without thinking about why, and as I drifted off to sleep, one thought echoed in my mind. Soon, it would be my turn to explain the arrangement to another version of myself. The cycle would continue, as it always had. Time isn't what we think it is, and neither, it seems, am I. Story 5. I never believed in the supernatural. As a journalist specializing in debunking haunted locations, I'd spent years proving that bumps in the night were just old pipes and ghostly apparitions were merely tricks of light. My editor called me the supernatural skeptic, a title I wore proudly until I checked into room 1408 at the Dolphin Hotel. It was supposed to be routine, my 13th article in a series exposing haunted hotel rooms as nothing more than tourist traps with clever marketing. The Dolphins manager, Gerald Olin, had practically begged me not to stay in 1408. He offered me an expensive bottle of cognac-free dinner, even access to the hotel's documents detailing the room's grim history. 12 suicides, and at least 30 natural deaths since the hotel opened in 1912. Nobody lasts more than an hour in 1408. Mr. Enslin. Olin had warned, his face grave beneath the hotel's elegant lighting. Why not write about the presidential suite instead? But I insisted. I always did. The room itself looked disappointingly ordinary. When I first entered, standard hotel furniture, bland artwork, the usual amenities. Nothing to suggest it had driven dozens to madness or death. I remember setting up my recording equipment, narrating my initial impressions into my dictaphone with the practiced sarcasm that had become my trademark. Room 1408, the Dolphin Hotel. Initial observation: it's a room, with a bed, and wait for it, a bathroom. The only thing haunting this place is the criminal markup on the mini-bar items. I poured myself a drink from the cognac Olin had reluctantly given me and settled in to wait for anything to happen. The first hour passed uneventfully. I checked my watch repeatedly, growing increasingly smug about Olin's 1-hour warning. The first sign that something was wrong came when I tried to call room service. The phone worked perfectly, but the cheerful voice that answered wasn't the hotel operator. "This is 911 emergency. Please hold." I hung up immediately, unsettled but still rational. A crossed line, perhaps. I tried again with the same result. Then I noticed something else. The digital clock on the nightstand was displaying 6060. Not the 1000 AM, which is what it should have shown. Clever, I muttered, assuming it was some kind of gimmick the hotel used to unnerve guests. I walked to the window, thinking some fresh air might clear my head. The window wouldn't open, not unusual for a high-rise hotel. But when I looked out, instead of seeing the New York skyline, I saw a brick wall where there should have been open air. I was certain, absolutely certain, that 14008 was a corner room with unobstructed views. I turned away from the window, and that's when I noticed the painting above the bed had changed. What had been a generic seascape was now a dark forest scene with a small, pale figure standing among the trees, facing away from the viewer. My heart began to race. But my mind, my rational, skeptical mind, scrambled for explanations. Hidden projectors, gas-causing hallucinations, an elaborate prank orchestrated by Olin to scare off the notorious debunker. I decided to leave. This had gone beyond the usual haunted room theatrics, and I needed to confront Olin about his methods. But when I opened the door, instead of the hotel corridor, I found myself staring at a brick wall identical to the one outside the window. That was the moment my skepticism began to crumble. I slammed the door shut, my breath coming in short gasps. When I turned around, the room had changed again. The walls seemed farther apart, the ceiling higher, the bed had moved several feet to the left, and the painting now showed the pale figure turned halfway toward the viewer, its face still in shadow. "This isn't happening," I said aloud, my voice sounding strange in the altered acoustics of the room. "This is not happening." But it was happening. The room was changing around me, subtly at first, then with increasing boldness. The wallpaper began to bubble and peel, revealing underneath not plaster or drywall, but a pulsing, organic surface that seemed to breathe. The temperature fluctuated wildly first, so cold my breath fogged, then so hot I felt my skin might blister. I tried the phone again, desperately punching numbers. This time I heard my father's voice, my father who had been dead for 15 years. "Mike, why did you let me die alone, Mike?" I dropped the receiver as if it had burned me. The voice continued to emanate from it, even disconnected, growing louder, more accusatory. I backed away until I hit the wall, which felt soft and yielding against my back. The clock now reads 72, impossible numbers for an impossible room. I'm not sure when I realized that 1408 wasn't just haunted. It was alive and malevolent in a way that defied comprehension. It wasn't content to frighten me. It wanted to break me, to consume me. It knew my fears, my regrets, my deepest shames, and it used them against me, with surgical precision. The room showed me my ex-wife crying after our divorce, scenes from my childhood I'd tried to forget, the disappointed face of my father on his deathbed, when I arrived too late to say goodbye. But these weren't just memories or hallucinations. They were happening around me, to me, as if the room had collapsed time itself. I tried to ground myself in reality by recording what was happening, speaking into my dictaphone with increasingly fragmented observations. When I played it back, all I heard were screams not mine, but those of previous occupants of 1408, a chorus of terror spanning decades. At some point the clock now showing 99:99:99. I found myself standing on the ledge outside the window that had previously opened to a brick wall. Below me stretched New York City, but wrong somehow, twisted and impossible. Buildings bent at non-Euclidean angles. Streets folded back on themselves like Mobius strips, and every window, in every building, contained a face, the same face, watching me with hungry anticipation. I nearly jumped then. The room wanted me to jump. It had happened before. 9 of the 12 suicides had been jumpers, according to Ullman's records. The room cultivated despair like a gardener tends roses, nurturing it to full bloom before harvesting, but something in me resisted. Some core of stubborn defiance refused to give the room what it wanted. I climbed back inside, even as the ledge crumbled to dust behind me. The room seemed to rage at my continued resistance. The furniture began to move on its own, flying across the space with violent force. The bed levitated, spinning in midair before crashing against the ceiling. The bathroom door slammed repeatedly, each impact shaking the foundations, and through it all voices whispered from the walls, some pleading, some threatening, all trying to erode my sanity. I don't know how long this continued. Time had no meaning in 1408. The clock now showed symbols instead of numbers, glyphs that hurt my eyes to look at directly. My dictaphone melted in my hand, the plastic running through my fingers like hot wax. Then came the moment when I truly understood the nature of 1408. The room wasn't just haunted by those who had died there, it was a collector of souls, a repository of suffering. Each person who entered left something behind, and that collection of pain and fear had coalesced into something sentient and hungry. The walls began to bleed, not metaphorically, but literally, a thick black substance that smelled of copper and rot. It formed puddles on the floor that began to take shape, rising up into humanoid figures that lurched toward me with jerky, unnatural movements. I retreated to the center of the room, the only space not yet corrupted by the black ooze. The figures surrounded me, their features resolving into faces I recognized, the documented victims of 1408. Yes, but also people from my own life. My father, my ex-wife, a college friend who had died in a car accident. All watching me with empty eyes, reaching for me with dripping hands. "You're not real," I told them, my voice hoarse from screaming. "None of this is real." But even as I said it, I knew I was wrong. 1408 had its own reality, one that superseded the rational world I thought I understood. Here, the impossible was commonplace, and the laws of physics were suggestions at best. In desperation, I did the only thing I could think of. I set fire to the room. My lighter, a cheap plastic thing I'd carried for years, became my salvation. I ignited the bedsheets, the curtains, my own notebook filled with initial observations that now seemed laughably naive. The room fought back. The sprinklers remained dry. The fire alarm stayed silent. But the flames spread with unnatural speed, as if the room itself were made of kindling. The shadowy figures retreated from the light and heat, dissolving back into the walls. As the fire grew, something strange happened. The room began to reset. The bleeding walls dried up, the impossible dimensions contracted, the twisted furniture straightened itself. Through the smoke and flames, I could see glimpses of the ordinary hotel room I had first entered. I made for the door, choking on smoke that smelled like burning memories. This time when I opened it, the hotel corridor stretched before me, blessedly normal and mundane. I stumbled out as alarms finally began to sound throughout the building. Later, after the fire department had come and gone, after Olin had given me that knowing look, part pity, part vindication, I sat in the hotel bar, trying to make sense of what had happened. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My recorder was gone, lost to the flames. I had no proof, nothing but my testimony, which sounded insane even to my own ears. A hotel security guard approached me, holding something charred and partially melted. "Found this in what's left of 1408, he said, placing it on the bar. "Thought you might want it back." It was the room's clock,
Its digital display cracked and blackened, but somehow impossibly it was still working, and it displayed a single message scrolling across the broken screen. See you soon. I checked out of the Dolphin Hotel that night and never returned. My debunking series ended with the 12th article. I never wrote about 14.8. How could I? What would I say? That I had finally found a genuinely haunted room. That would be both true and profoundly inadequate. The truth is more complex and terrifying. 14.8 wasn't haunted. It was a haunt, a place where reality itself had worn thin, where something from beyond could reach through and touch our world, and once it touches you, it never fully lets go. I know this because sometimes in the darkest hours of night, my digital clock will briefly display 6060, and I'll feel the room around me begin to change. I've tried to move on with my life in the months since my night in the Dolphin Hotel. I abandoned supernatural journalism entirely, switching to travel writing safe, pleasant articles about beaches and tourist attractions. I moved to a new apartment, changed my phone number, even considered changing my name, but untold note follows me. It started with small things, digital displays occasionally showing impossible numbers, glimpses of black ooze seeping from electrical outlets, the faint sound of my father's voice coming from unplugged appliances, incidents I could almost convince myself were stress-induced hallucinations, aftershocks from my traumatic experience.
But they've been getting worse. Last week, I woke to find my bedroom walls covered in peeling wallpaper, identical to that in 1408. Despite my apartment having painted walls, it was gone when I returned from making coffee, but the message was clear. The room wasn't finished with me. I've researched the history of the Dolphin Hotel more thoroughly now, digging deeper than the surface-level information Olin provided. The building stands on the site of a former asylum, where experimental treatments were conducted on patients experiencing what was then called reality distortion syndrome. According to obscure medical journals from the early 1900s, these patients claimed to see doors where there should be none, and rooms that changed according to fears. More disturbing still, I've tracked down 3 previous occupants of 1408 who survived their encounters. One is in a psychiatric facility, spending his days drawing the same image repeatedly, a hotel room with something lurking in the corners. Another refuses to sleep in enclosed spaces, living in a self-made shelter in the woods. The third seemed normal, until I mentioned the room number, at which point she began screaming uncontrollably. None of them lasted more than an hour in the room. I was there for nearly 3. I wonder now if that's why 1408 can reach me even at a distance. Perhaps I absorbed more of its essence than previous survivors, carried more of it out with me. Or perhaps it simply found me more interesting. A dedicated skeptic forced to confront the unexplainable makes for a satisfying conquest. Last night, I dreamed I was back in 1408, but the room had expanded impossibly, its walls now encompassing my entire apartment building. I walked from room to room, each one containing a different horror I recognized from my original stay, others new and inventive torments. In the final room, I found a door marked Exit and opened it eagerly, only to find myself stepping back into 1408, the cycle beginning again. I woke to find my bedroom door had vanished, replaced by a smooth, unbroken wall. For 3 hours I was trapped until the door suddenly reappeared, exactly where it should have been all along. A reminder that 1408 could take away my exits at any time. I've considered ending things on my own terms. It would be a final act of defiance denying the room its game. But I suspect that's exactly what it wants. Another suicide to add to its collection. And I'm still too stubborn, too determined to beat this thing. Whatever this thing actually is. So instead, I've begun to fight back in my own way. I leave lights on at all times. The room's influence seems stronger in darkness. I've covered all mirrors and reflective surfaces after noticing figures moving in them that shouldn't be there. I play music constantly to drown out the whispers that emerge from my walls at night. And I write. I document everything, creating a record that might help others if they encounter something similar. Perhaps by understanding 1408 I can find its weakness. some way to sever its connection to me. Yesterday, I received a package from the Dolphin Hotel, a package I never requested. Inside was the cognac bottle Olin had offered me before my stay, now empty except for a note. Some guests never check out completely. The handwriting was my own. Tonight marks exactly 1 month since my night in 1408. I don't know if that holds any significance, but I've barricaded myself in my living room, surrounded by crucifixes, protective symbols from half a dozen religions, and enough caffeine to keep me awake until morning. My laptop is running low on battery, and I'm afraid to plug it in. Electrical outlets have become unpredictable, sometimes showing depths that no wall could possibly contain. The temperature is dropping rapidly, my breath fogging in the increasingly cold air. The walls seem to be breathing, subtle movements at the edge of perception. And my digital watch, despite being an analog model when I purchased it, now displays a familiar countdown: 60, 60, 65, D9, 65, D8. I don't know what happens when it reaches 0. I don't intend to find out. If you're reading this and you ever hear of room 14008 at the Dolphin Hotel, stay away. No matter how skeptical you are, no matter how convinced you are of the rational order of the universe, stay away. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. The countdown reads 60:30 now. Half an hour by 140:08's impossible time. I'm going to try something desperate, a ritual described by one of the survivors, involving salt, iron, and personal blood. She claimed it bought her temporary freedom from the room's influence. I don't have many options left. If this works, I'll update this account. If not, well, there's always another skeptic ready to prove the supernatural doesn't exist. Perhaps you'll be the next to check into 1408. Just remember, it's not just a haunted room. It's a room that haunts you. The clock reads 61. I hear knocking at a door that isn't there. 3 days have passed since my last entry. The ritual failed, or perhaps succeeded in a way I didn't anticipate. As the countdown reached 0, my apartment dissolved around me, walls peeling away like layers of an onion to reveal the familiar confines of room 1408. But something was different this time. The room was afraid of me. I felt it immediately, a tension in the air, a hesitancy in the way the shadows moved. The malevolence was still present, but tempered with something new, uncertainty. In that moment I understood something crucial about 14008's nature. It feeds on fear, yes, but it's also sustained by belief. My skepticism had been eroding since my first visit, replaced by terror and acceptance of the room's power. I had been making it stronger. Standing in the reconstituted room, I did something counterintuitive. I denied it. Not in the desperate way of my first visit, but with calm certainty. "You're not real," I told it, and this time I meant it differently. Not that the phenomena weren't happening, but that they had no inherent power beyond what I granted them. The room responded with its usual tricks: bleeding walls, impossible geometries, voices of the dead, but they seemed hollow somehow, like a magician's act, once you've seen how the illusion works. I walked to the door that had previously opened to a brick wall and turned the handle with confidence. It opened onto the hotel corridor. I didn't leave immediately. Instead, I turned back to face the room. "You exist because we remember you," I said to the empty air. "You're nothing but a parasite feeding on our fears." The room seemed to contract around my words, the walls bending inward as if in pain. The clock, which had reset to 60, 60, 60, began to run backward, numbers blurring with impossible speed. I understood then that 1408 wasn't just a location. It was a collective nightmare given form through decades of suffering. Each victim had added to its reality, making it stronger, more defined. By acknowledging its rules, I had been playing its game, so I changed the rules. I walked back into the room and began to alter it through sheer force of will. Where the wallpaper bubbled and peeled, I imagined it smooth and new. Where the furniture twisted into impossible shapes, I visualized it returning to normal. It was exhausting, like trying to hold back a flood with my bare hands. But gradually the room began to respond. The entities that had formed from the black ooze approached me, my father's face among them, his expression accusatory. But this time, instead of retreating, I stepped forward and embraced the figure. "You're not my father," I said. "You're just wearing his face, and I don't fear you anymore." The figure dissolved at my touch, collapsing back into formless liquid before evaporating entirely. One by one, I confronted each manifestation, acknowledging the fear it represented before rejecting its power over me. With each small victory, the room grew more normal, its influence waning. Finally, only the clock remained anomalous, still counting backward at impossible speed. I approached it, understanding now that it was the heart of 1408, the focal point of its distortions. Time itself was the room's most fundamental weapon, the way it trapped victims in loops of terror, stretching minutes into perceived hours. I picked up the clock and addressed the room one final time. "I'm checking out now." Then I walked out the door, taking the clock with me. In the corridor, I felt the pull of the room trying to draw me back, but it was weaker now. Manageable. I walked to the elevator, rode it down to the lobby, and approached the front desk where Olin stood, his expression changing from professional courtesy to shock as he recognized me. "Mr. Enslin, how long were you up there?" According to the real world, I had been in room 140 for exactly 70 minutes. But more importantly, I had truly returned, mind intact. I placed the clock on the counter between us. Its display now showed normal numbers, the correct time. "I won't be needing a receipt," I told him, "but I am taking this as a souvenir." Olin stared at the clock, then at me. "No one takes anything from that room," he said quietly. "It always stays behind." "Not this time," I replied, picking up the clock again. As my fingers closed around it, I felt a final surge of resistance from 1408, a desperate attempt to maintain its connection to me. But the link was already weakening, like a stretched rubber band finally snapping. I left the Dolphin Hotel and hailed a taxi, the clock secure in my pocket. By removing its anchor to linear time, I had fundamentally changed the room's nature. It might still exist, might still claim victims, but a crucial aspect of its power was now in my possession. In the weeks since, I've kept the clock in a small safe in my new apartment across the country. Sometimes late at night, I hear it ticking despite its digital display, a reminder that my victory was real but incomplete. 1408 is still out there, perhaps diminished, perhaps merely regrouping. I've resumed my writing, but with a different focus, no longer debunking the supernatural, but not quite confirming it either. Instead, I write about the power of perception, the way our minds shape reality and vice versa. My first new article is titled, "The Architecture of Fear: How Belief Constructs Our Haunted Spaces." Occasionally, I still see glimpses of 1408's influence, a brief warping of space in the corner of my eye, a momentary change in temperature, the sound of distant knocking. But these incidents are fading, becoming less frequent and less intense. The room is losing its grip on me, or perhaps I'm losing my grip on it. Perhaps that's what freedom from 1408 truly means, not escaping its reality, but recognizing that reality is more fluid than we imagine, more susceptible to our will than we dare believe. Last night I dreamed of the room again, but differently. It was empty, dormant, waiting for its next occupant. In the dream I stood in the doorway but didn't enter. I simply observed the ordinary hotel room with its bland furnishings and generic artwork. "I remember what you really are," I told it, "and that's why you can't touch me anymore." As I turned to leave in the dream, I noticed something written on the inside of the door, carved into the wood in small, precise letters. "See you in room 1408. But this time it wasn't a threat. It was just words, powerless without my fear to animate them. I woke feeling rested for the first time in months. The clock in my safe had stopped ticking. When I opened it and checked the display, it showed all zeros before going dark completely, its battery finally exhausted. I think perhaps room 1408 has finally checked out of me. At least, that's what I choose to believe. And in matters of rooms like 1408, belief is everything. Story 6. I never paid much attention to my family history. Names and dates on a dusty tree seemed irrelevant to my life in the city, where I'd built a career in architectural design, far from the rural shadows of my ancestors. That changed 3 months ago when my father died unexpectedly, leaving me the sole heir to a property I barely remembered, the Sullivan family estate, a Victorian monstrosity that had stood on the same patch of Massachusetts woodland since 1840. It's been empty for nearly a decade, he explained, sliding a heavy iron key across his desk. Your father moved to assisted living after your mother passed, but he never could bring himself to sell it. I'll probably just list it with a realtor, I said, pocketing the key. I don't have time to deal with an old house. The lawyer Michaels, I think his name was, nodded, but seemed hesitant. There's one more thing, he said, retrieving a package wrapped in cloth from his cabinet. Your father was insistent that this be given directly to you, said it was a family heirloom of great importance. The package contained a leather-bound book, its cover worn smooth by generations of hands. The gilt lettering on the spine had faded, but I could still make out the words, Sullivan Family Chronicle 1723 to present. A family Bible, I asked. More of a detailed genealogy, Michaels replied. Your father maintained it meticulously, as did his father before him. Apparently, it's been a family obligation for centuries. I thanked him and left, tossing both the key and the book into my glove compartment. They remained there for 2 weeks before curiosity finally got the better of me. It was a rainy Sunday with nothing better to do, so I decided to drive out to see the property before contacting realtors. The Sullivan estate sat at the end of a long gravel drive, partially hidden by ancient oaks. It was larger than I remembered from childhood visits, 3 stories of weathered brick and gabled roofs, with a wraparound porch that had seen better days. Despite its dilapidated state, there was something undeniably impressive about the old place. I could almost imagine how it must have looked in its prime, when the Sullivans were prominent landowners in the county. I spent that afternoon wandering through rooms draped in dust covers, opening windows to release the musty air that had been trapped inside for years. Most of the furniture was Victorian heavy wooden pieces that would probably fetch a decent price at auction. In my father's study, I found shelves lined with leather-bound books, a collection of antique maps, and a desk that looked like it belonged in a museum. It was there, sitting in my father's chair as evening approached, that I finally opened the family chronicle. The first pages contained what I expected: births, marriages, deaths, recorded in fading ink by different hands over the centuries. But as I continued reading, I noticed something odd. The entries weren't just dry records of dates. They included detailed accounts of family members' lives and deaths, particularly the deaths. I was about to close the book when a name caught my eye: Thomas Sullivan, my great-grandfather. According to the Chronicle, he died on October 17, 1953, at the age of 3. The cause was listed as asphyxiation found in locked study. A note in the margin, written in a different hand, simply said, he saw it too. Curious. I flipped back through the pages, scanning the death entries. James Sullivan, 1921, age 33s, suffocation during sleep, no medical explanation. William Sullivan, 1889, age 33, throat constriction, no visible cause. The pattern continued back through the generations, each death occurring at exactly 33 years of age, each attributed to some form of suffocation or asphyxiation. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the drafty old house. I checked my father's entry. Harold Sullivan, died 2023, age 86. He had escaped the pattern. But then I noticed another detail. My father wasn't born a Sullivan. He had been adopted as an infant, a fact mentioned in his birth entry, but nowhere else in the chronicle. I pulled out my phone and checked the date. September 15th. My 33rd birthday was exactly 3 months away, on December 15th. That night, I took the chronicle back to my apartment in the city, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Coincidences happen. Family medical conditions could explain similar deaths. There was no such thing as a family curse. Yet I found myself staying up until dawn, Poring over the entries, the chronicle went back further than I'd initially realized, all the way to 1723, when the first Sullivan arrived in America. Ezekiel Sullivan, according to the account, had fled Ireland after accusing a local woman of witchcraft. The woman, Moira Blackwood, was executed, but not before allegedly cursing Ezekiel and his descendants. With each generation, I will take one breath for mine that was stolen. When the shadow finds you in your 33rd year, know that it is my justice come at last. I laughed nervously in my empty apartment. Witchcraft. Curses. It was absurd, yet the pattern of deaths was harder to dismiss. I spent the next week researching my family history, beyond what was recorded in the chronicle. County records confirmed many of the deaths, though the causes were often listed as unknown or heart failure in the official documents. 2 weeks after visiting the estate, I began having dreams. In each one, I was in the old house, always in a different room, but never alone. Something moved in the corners of my vision, a darkness deeper than shadow, vaguely human in shape, but constantly shifting. In the dreams, I couldn't breathe. I would wake gasping, my hands at my throat. After the third such dream, I decided to return to the estate. If I was going to sell the place, I needed to clear out my father's belongings anyway. At least, that's what I told myself. The truth was that the chronicle had awakened something in me, a need to understand, to know if there was any substance to this supposed curse. The house seemed different when I arrived the second time. More oppressive, as if it had been waiting for me to return. I brought supplies to stay for a few days, cleaning materials, some groceries, a sleeping bag since I hadn't arranged for the utilities to be turned back on. I started in the attic, working my way methodically through trunks and boxes. Most contained what you'd expect: old clothes, Christmas decorations, photo albums, but in a small trunk tucked under the eaves, I found something unusual, a collection of journals belonging to previous Sullivans. Each one had been written during the year leading up to their 33rd birthday. The accounts were disturbingly similar. Each writer described seeing a shadowy figure in their peripheral vision. Each mentioned increasing difficulty breathing, especially at night. Each expressed growing certainty that they were being watched, hunted by something they couldn't quite see. The Journal of William Sullivan, dated 1889, was particularly detailed. It is always behind me now. When I turn, it withdraws, but I can feel its presence, a coldness that seeps into my bones. Last night, I woke to find I could not move, could not breathe. Something was pressing down upon my chest. Though the room was empty, I fear I am going mad, yet I know what I experience is real. The curse Moira spoke of is no superstition. I closed the journal, my hands trembling slightly. This was ridiculous. I was allowing myself to be spooked by the ramblings of distant relatives who had likely suffered from undiagnosed medical conditions. Sleep paralysis could explain the sensation of pressure on the chest. Anxiety could account for breathing difficulties. There were rational explanations. Yet that night, as I lay in my sleeping bag in what had once been my childhood bedroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The house creaked and settled around me, each sound magnified in the darkness. I found myself straining to listen, to distinguish between the natural noises of an old building and something else. Just as I was finally drifting off to sleep, a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside my room. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding. The sound came again, a deliberate step, followed by another. Someone or something was walking slowly toward my door. I reached for my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The footsteps stopped. For several long seconds, there was only silence. Then, slowly, the doorknob began to turn. The door swung open onto an empty hallway. I didn't sleep again that night. When dawn finally broke, I packed my things and drove back to the city. The family chronicle and the journals piled on my passenger seat. I needed to approach this logically, to research further before returning to the house. Over the next few weeks, I dug deeper into the Blackwood-Sullivan connection. Local historical records confirmed that Moira Blackwood had been executed for witchcraft in 1723 in a small village outside Dublin. Ezekiel Sullivan had indeed been one of her accusers. But there was more. According to court transcripts, Ezekiel had once been engaged to Moira's daughter Catherine, before abruptly breaking it off to marry a wealthy merchant's daughter instead. Catherine had apparently committed suicide shortly after her mother's execution. The transcript included Moira's final words before hanging:
For the breath you stole from my daughter I will steal the breath from your sons, unto the last generation. When they reach the age of Christ's death, my shadow will find them. 33. The age of Christ at crucifixion. I consulted experts, historians, folklorists, even a reluctant parapsychologist. Most dismissed the curse as superstition, pointing out that such beliefs were common in the 18th century. The parapsychologist, however, was less dismissive. Family curses typically require something to anchor them, she explained during our Zoom call. An object, a location, sometimes even a name that passes down through generations. If, and I stress, if there is anything to this curse, there would need to be some physical connection between you and this Moira Blackwood. Like what? I asked.
It could be anything, a personal possession, something made from her remains, an object present at her death. These would have been considered powerful vessels for binding a curse. I thought of the house, wondering if Ezekiel had brought something with him from Ireland. But the current Sullivan estate hadn't been built until over a century after Moira's death. Whatever connection existed would have to have been preserved and passed down deliberately. October turned to November. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the approaching date of my birthday, but physical symptoms began to manifest exactly as described in the journals. I developed a persistent cough. I would wake gasping for air. Twice, I went to the emergency room convinced I was having an asthma attack, only to have doctors find nothing wrong, and I began to see it, the shadow. Always at the edge of my vision, never quite there when I turned to look. A darkness that seemed to absorb light, vaguely human-shaped but constantly shifting. By December 1st, I knew I had to return to the house. Whatever answers existed would be found there, not in my city apartment surrounded by half-empty takeout containers and printouts of historical documents. The curse, if that's what it was connected to the Sullivan line, to the house, to something I hadn't yet discovered. The estate looked forbidding when I arrived, silhouetted against a gray winter sky. Snow had fallen the previous night, and my footprints were the only marks leading up to the front door. Inside the house was freezing. I turned on the portable heater I'd brought and set up in the study, surrounded by the chronicles and journals I'd been studying. That's when I noticed something I'd overlooked before. In the earliest entries of the family chronicle, there were references to a safeguard that Ezekiel had created. The nature of this safeguard wasn't specified, but it was described as being hidden where none would think to look, yet where every Sullivan must eventually return. I spent days searching the house, looking for hidden compartments, secret rooms, anything that might qualify as a hiding place. I found nothing. As December 15th drew closer, my breathing became more labored. The shadow appearances increased in frequency. I began to feel a constant pressure around my throat, as if invisible hands were loosely circling it, ready to tighten. On December 14th, the day before my 33rd birthday, I sat exhausted in the study, surrounded by books and papers. I had searched every inch of the house without success. Whatever safeguard Ezekiel had created was either gone or hidden beyond my ability to find it. In desperation, I returned to the family chronicle, reading Ezekiel's entries over and over, looking for any clue I might have missed. One phrase kept repeating: blood will return to blood, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. It hit me then. What if the safeguard wasn't hidden in the house at all? What if it was buried with the Sullivans themselves? The family plot was located at the edge of the property, a small cemetery surrounded by wrought iron fencing. I grabbed a flashlight and a shovel from the shed and made my way there as the winter sun began to set. The oldest graves were at the center: Ezekiel Sullivan and his wife, Elizabeth. Their headstones were weathered, the inscriptions barely legible after 3 centuries of exposure. I stood before Ezekiel's grave, uncertain what to do next. Digging up a grave felt wrong on every level, not to mention illegal. But as the daylight faded and shadows lengthened across the cemetery, I felt that familiar constriction in my throat. In the corner of my eye, I saw the shadow moving between the headstones, more solid than I'd ever seen it before. I began to dig. The ground was frozen, making progress slow and difficult. Night fell completely as I worked, my breath forming clouds in the beam of the flashlight. The shadow circled me, always just out of direct sight. The pressure around my throat increased until each breath became a struggle. Finally, my shovel struck something solid. Clearing away the dirt revealed not a coffin, but a small stone box, about the size of a bread loaf. It was sealed with wax and inscribed with symbols I didn't recognize. With trembling hands, I lifted it from the earth. The moment I touched the box, the pressure around my throat eased slightly. I carried it back to the house, the shadow following at a distance, as if wary of what I'd found. In the study, I carefully broke the wax seal and opened the box. Inside was a black silk scarf, discolored with age, wrapped around what appeared to be a lock of dark hair bound with thread. Beneath these was a yellowed parchment covered in handwriting. I recognized from the earliest entries in the family chronicle Ezekiel Sullivan's hand. The parchment contained what appeared to be instructions for a ritual, along with an account of what had really happened in Ireland. According to Ezekiel's confession, he had not merely accused Moira Blackwood of witchcraft, he had falsified evidence against her, after she threatened to reveal that he had seduced and abandoned her daughter. Catherine's suicide had been a result of pregnancy, not heartbreak. Ezekiel had fled to America, not just fearing Moira's curse, but escaping the consequences of his actions. The scarf, Ezekiel wrote, had been used to hang Moira. The hair was Catherine's. Together, they formed the anchor of the curse, the physical connection that had allowed Moira's vengeance to follow the Sullivan line across an ocean and through centuries. The ritual described was meant to break the curse, or rather, to redirect it. Ezekiel had discovered that by performing certain rites on the night of a Sullivan's 33rd birthday, the curse could be passed to another family member, sparing the intended victim. This, I realized with growing horror, was how my father had survived. As an adopted Sullivan, he had performed the ritual and redirected the curse to his biological son, to me. Among my father's papers, I found evidence that he had tracked me down years ago, though we'd never met. He had known about me all along, had planned for me to inherit the estate and the chronicle, had ensured the curse would find its proper target. I looked at the clock on the study wall. 11:45 p.m., December 14th. In 15 minutes I would turn 33, and if the pattern held true, the curse would take full effect. I had a choice to make. The ritual required blood from another family member, someone who could receive the curse in my place. I had no children, no siblings that I knew of. The Sullivan line would end with me, one way or another. As midnight approached, the shadow grew more substantial. It no longer retreated when I turned toward it. It stood in the corner of the study, a void in the shape of a woman, watching me with eyes I couldn't see but could feel. I made my decision. I placed the scarf and hair in the fireplace and set them alight. The parchment followed. If the curse was anchored to these objects, perhaps destroying them would end it once and for all. The items burned with an unnatural flame, too bright, too hot, tinged with green at the edges. The shadow moved then, gliding across the room toward me with purpose. The pressure around my throat became a stranglehold. I couldn't breathe, couldn't call for help. I fell to my knees as the clock began to strike midnight. Through darkening vision, I watched the shadow coalesce into a more defined shape. A woman in old-fashioned dress, her face gaunt but her eyes burning with centuries of hatred. She knelt before me, her insubstantial hand reaching out to touch my face. "At last," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves rustling, "one who seeks truth rather than escape. But are you truly of his blood? The line must end with blood." With my last conscious thought, I pulled the DNA test results from my pocket, the test I'd taken weeks ago out of curiosity about my biological parents. I had no Sullivan blood. My father had lied about that too, had chosen a random child to bear his curse. The shadow woman took the paper, seeming to read it, despite the darkness of her form. Then she laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Clever Ezekiel, to the end," she said. "The curse demands Sullivan blood, yet here you are, no Sullivan at all. A final deception." The pressure on my throat eased slightly. I gasped for air, my vision clearing enough to see the shadow beginning to fade. "But justice remains incomplete," she continued, her form growing dimmer. "I will return when true Sullivan blood emerges. The line is not yet ended." As the clock finished its 12 strikes, The shadow disappeared completely. I collapsed on the study floor, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in months. The curse had not been broken, merely postponed. Somewhere out there, some distant Sullivan relation might still carry the bloodline. Someday the shadow would find them. In the morning, I buried the stone box where I had found it, no longer containing physical anchors but still carrying the memory of a centuries-old hatred. I updated the family chronicle with my own account, warning any future Sullivan who might read it. I sold the estate 3 months later, but kept the chronicle. Sometimes, I think I see the shadow watching me from corners, but it never approaches. I am not its target. Not anymore, but I wonder about unknown cousins, about forgotten branches of the family tree. I wonder if somewhere, a Sullivan child is growing up unaware of their heritage, unaware of what waits for them on their 33rd birthday. And I wonder if when the time comes they will find the chronicle I've hidden away and know what they're facing before it's too late. Because family curses don't die easily. They wait, they adapt, they find a way to continue. And Moira Blackwood is still waiting for her justice.